Here's a question I want you to sit with tonight. What if the most philosophically rich show of the last 20 years wasn't some brooding prestige drama on HBO, wasn't a cerebral sci-fi thriller, wasn't anything that critics would ever put on a list next to the words deep or meaningful? What if it was a Cartoon Network show about a blue jay and a raccoon who can't be bothered to mow a lawn? I know how that sounds. But stay with me. Get comfortable. Pull the blankets up. Because tonight, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take regular show, all 244 episodes, all 8 seasons, every single absurd, heartfelt, ridiculous minute of it. And we're going to look at it through the lens of actual philosophy. Sartre, Camus, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Plato, the real ones. And I'm going to make a case, a genuine, considered, honest case, that this show, created by a guy from Hanford, California, who doodled a raccoon on the side of his desk at CalArts, accidentally stumbled into one of the most complete philosophical texts about what it means to be alive, to grow up, and to let go that any piece of media has ever produced. That's my thesis. And if that sounds like a stretch, well, that's kind of the point. Regular show was always about things that started small and got impossibly, cosmically big. So let's do the same thing tonight. Oh, and if you haven't already, maybe hit subscribe. We do this kind of thing a lot around here, pulling apart the shows that shaped us and finding out what they were really saying all along. No pressure, just, if you're into it. All right, let's go back to September 6th, 2010, the very first episode, The Power, Season 1, Episode 1. Mordecai and Rigby are wrestling over a doll called Beef Burrito, and they accidentally punch a hole in their wall. That's it. That's the inciting incident of the entire series. Two 23-year-old park groundskeepers breaking something because they were goofing around. And their solution isn't to fix it, isn't to own up to it, isn't to do literally anything responsible. Their solution is to find a magical keyboard that Rigby stole from a wizard who was relieving himself in a bush. And I just want to pause here and acknowledge that this is the actual canonical beginning of this show. And they use this keyboard to try to convince Benson to give them a raise so they can afford to fix the hole. And naturally, as you'd expect, things escalate until Skips gets sent to the moon and reality itself starts bending. Just another Monday at the park. Now, JG. Quintel, and I think this is important context, made 2 short films at the California Institute of the Arts before regular show existed. One was called The Naive Man from Lollyland, which won the Producer's Choice Award and the Student Animator Award at the 2005 Nextoons Nicktoons Film Festival. The other was 2 in the AM/PM, which was about 2 gas station employees who eat candy and start hallucinating. The characters from those films, the naive lollipop ambassador, the hallucinating gas station workers, became the prototypes for Pops, Mordecai, and Benson. The DNA of regular show was always rooted in this idea of mundane jobs, mundane people, and then something cracking open underneath the surface of ordinary life. And I think that crack, that fracture between the ordinary and the extraordinary, is where the philosophy lives. So let's start where I think we have to start. Let's start with Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre had this idea, and it's one of those ideas that once you hear it, you can't unhear it, that existence precedes essence. What that means, in plain language, is that you don't come into the world with a purpose. You're not born with a destiny, or a job description, or a meaning stitched into your bones. You just exist, and then, through your choices, through your actions, through the things you do and don't do, you create who you are. You build your essence after the fact. And he called this radical freedom. The idea that humans are, as he put it, condemned to be free. Which sounds like a contradiction, right? How can freedom be a condemnation? But Sartre's point was that freedom comes with total, absolute, inescapable responsibility. If there's no God handing you a script, if there's no cosmic plan, then every single thing you do is your choice. And every choice defines you. That's terrifying. That's the weight of it. Now think about Mordecai and Rigby. These are 2 23-year-old guys, and Quintel voiced Mordecai himself, by the way, with William Salyers bringing Rigby to life with that perfect raspy indignation, and they work as groundskeepers at a park. They have no career trajectory. They have no 5-year plan. Mordecai dropped out of art school because he was insecure about his own skill. Rigby didn't even finish high school. He's a high school dropout, and we learn this gradually over the series before his whole arc in Season 7 finally addresses it head-on. They live together in a shared room in the park house. They play video games. They slack off. They avoid every task Benson gives them like their lives depend on it. And from the outside, from a conventional standpoint, they look like failures. They look like two guys who are wasting their lives. And you know what? The show knows this. Benson tells them this constantly. Society tells them this. The very premise of the show is built on the tension between what they should be doing and what they actually do. But here's where Sartre comes in, and here's where it gets interesting. Because Sartre also talked about something called bad faith. Bad faith is when you pretend you don't have a choice. When you tell yourself, I have to do this, or this is just who I am, or I don't have any other option. Bad faith is denying your own freedom. It's acting like you're a thing, like a rock or a table, instead of a consciousness that's constantly choosing. And the beautiful paradox of Mordecai and Rigby is that their slacking off is a choice, a deliberate, consistent, radical choice. They are not passively drifting. They are actively, aggressively choosing not to participate in the system that tells them they need to be productive, ambitious, climbing some invisible ladder. Every single time Benson screams at them to rake the leaves or clean the fountain, and they instead find a way to play punchies or bet each other who can eat more hot dogs, they are exercising what Sartre would call authentic freedom. Now, and this is important, I'm not saying slacking off is inherently philosophical. I'm not saying that sitting on your couch avoiding your responsibilities makes you an existentialist hero. That would be ridiculous. But what I'm saying is that the show, whether intentionally or not, frames their choices as genuine choices. Mordecai and Rigby aren't victims of circumstance. They're not trapped. Mordecai could go back to art school. Rigby eventually does go back and get his GED. But in the early seasons, in the heart of the show, they are two people who have looked at the options in front of them and said, no, we're going to do this instead. We're going to exist on our own terms. And that is a radical act, even if it looks lazy from the outside. I keep thinking about that episode, and forgive me, this is going to be one of those tangents I go on, but I promise it connects. I keep thinking about Do Me a Solid. That's a Season 2 episode, and the premise is simple. Rigby asks Mordecai to do him a series of increasingly absurd favors, or solids, in exchange for one big solid in return. And the solids get worse and worse. Mordecai has to do humiliating things. Things that compromise who he is. And he does them. He does them because he made a commitment. Because he values the friendship. Because he's choosing to honor an obligation he freely entered into. And you know what that is? That's Sartre's idea of engagement. The idea that authentic freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about choosing your commitments and then standing by them, even when they cost you something. Mordecai's friendship with Rigby is a freely chosen commitment that he honors over and over again, even when Rigby is, frankly, the worst. Even when Rigby sabotaged his college admission. And we don't find that out until Regular Show, the movie, which premiered in 2015, where it's revealed that Rigby forged a rejection letter so Mordecai would think he didn't get into college university, because Rigby couldn't stand the idea of being left behind. That is one of the most devastating betrayals in animated television, and Mordecai forgives him. He chooses to forgive him, not because he has to, not because it's easy, but because the friendship matters more to him than the grudge. That's existential authenticity. That's building your essence through your choices, over and over, even when those choices are hard. And can I just pause here, because I keep thinking about how wild the movie's revelation actually is when you sit with it. Rigby, at some point in high school, found out that Mordecai got accepted into college university, and he didn't. And instead of just dealing with it, instead of being sad or angry, or even talking to Mordecai about it, Rigby forged a rejection letter. He created a fake document. He lied to his best friend's face about the trajectory of his entire life. And because of that lie, Mordecai never went to college. Mordecai ended up at the park. Their entire friendship, their entire dynamic, the entire show, all of it rests on this foundational betrayal. And the movie frames this as the catalyst for a literal time catastrophe. The Timonado. I love that Regular Show names its apocalyptic events like this. The Timonado is a temporal disaster that threatens to unravel reality, and it's rooted in Rigby's lie. The personal becomes the cosmic. A teenager's insecurity about losing his friend becomes a rupture in the fabric of space-time, which honestly is such a Regular Show way to handle it. The show always understood that the mundane and the cosmic are the same thing, that a small emotional truth can have infinite consequences. But what gets me, what really gets me, is the reconciliation. Because Mordecai could hold on to that anger forever. He has every right to. Rigby stole years from him. Rigby denied him the education he earned, the life he could have had. And Mordecai is furious. He ends the friendship. He walks away. And that's valid. That's an authentic choice, too. But he comes back. He chooses the friendship over the grudge. And I keep thinking about what Sartre said about freedom and responsibility. That we're not just responsible for our own choices, but for the world we create through those choices. Mordecai, by forgiving Rigby, creates a world where friendship survives betrayal. He chooses to live in that world rather than the world of justified resentment. And that's harder. That costs more, but it builds something richer. And here's a personal tangent. And I apologize in advance because I know I'm going on a lot of these. But this is a late night conversation, and that's how these go. I had a friendship like this once. Not the college letter part, obviously, but the part where someone you love does something that changes the shape of your life. And you have to decide whether the friendship is bigger than the harm. I chose to forgive. I'm still not sure it was the right call, but I think about Mordecai and Rigby when I think about it. And that probably tells you more about my relationship with this show than any philosophical analysis ever could. Anyway, and look, I think there's something else happening with Mordecai, specifically, that connects to Sartre's philosophy. Mordecai is constantly in bad faith when it comes to his romantic life. Think about it. He spends the first 4 seasons unable to tell Margaret how he feels. He fumbles. He overthinks. He creates elaborate scenarios to avoid the simple vulnerability of saying, I like you. And when he finally does confess in Stake Me Amadeus, Season 4, Episode 37, Margaret tells him she's been accepted to her dream college, Milton University, and she can't be his girlfriend. She leaves the restaurant crying. Mordecai is crushed. And then later, when he dates CJ, he's still caught up with Margaret. He's living in bad faith because he won't fully commit to the reality of his own choices. He keeps one foot in the past, one foot in a fantasy, and he can never be fully present with the person he's actually with. The love triangle between Mordecai, Margaret, and CJ across seasons 5 and 6 is, honestly, one of the most frustrating arcs in the show. Fans were genuinely upset, but I think the frustration is the point. Watching Mordecai flounder in bad faith is supposed to be uncomfortable. It's supposed to make you want to shake him and say, just choose, just commit to something, because that's what Sartre would say too. Stop pretending you don't have a choice. Stop hiding behind indecision. The refusal to choose is itself a choice, and it's the worst kind, the kind made in bad faith. Rigby, on the other hand, and this is something I don't think gets enough credit. Rigby is actually more existentially authentic than Mordecai for most of the series. I know that sounds counterintuitive. Rigby is the troublemaker. He's the one who drags Mordecai into messes. He's impulsive and selfish and kind of terrible sometimes. But he's honest about it. He doesn't pretend to be something he's not. When Rigby wants something, he goes after it with zero pretense. He doesn't agonize over whether it's the right thing. He doesn't dress up his desires in excuses. And his relationship with Eileen, and I love this arc, is so much healthier than anything Mordecai manages. Precisely because Rigby eventually just lets it happen. He stops fighting it. The episode Eileen Flat Screen showed us that when Mordecai wasn't around, Rigby and Eileen were already hanging out constantly, going to fairs together, having this whole life together that Rigby was too embarrassed to acknowledge publicly. And by dumped at the altar, we learn they've been dating for months, secretly, because Eileen didn't want to rub their happiness in Mordecai's face, given his relationship disasters. That's real. That's two people choosing each other without drama, without grand gestures, without any of the existential hand-wringing that plagues Mordecai. And by the finale, a regular epic final battle, which aired January 16th, 2017, and pulled a 9.9 out of 10 on IMDb, Rigby and Eileen share their first on-screen kiss. And in the flash forward, they're married with kids. They built something real, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me pull back, because I want to talk about the thing that makes regular show structurally unlike anything else on television, and I want to talk about it through the lens of Albert Camus, you know Camus, or at least you know the image. The French-Algerian writer with the cigarette and the trench coat, looking like the coolest person who ever lived. Camus wrote The Myth of Sisyphus in 1942, and in it, he tackles what he called the only truly serious philosophical question: whether or not life is worth living. Not in a dark way, in a profoundly hopeful way. Because his answer, and this is the part people remember, his answer is yes. Even though life is absurd, even though there is no inherent meaning, even though we are, metaphorically, pushing a boulder up a hill only to watch it roll back down, over and over again, forever. His famous conclusion? One must imagine Sisyphus happy, now. Think about the structure of a regular show episode. Every single episode follows roughly the same pattern. Mordecai and Rigby are given a mundane task: rake the leaves, clean the fountain, set up chairs for a party, return an overdue VHS tape. Something completely, utterly ordinary. And then, through a series of escalations, usually triggered by their own laziness or poor decision-making, the situation spirals into something cosmic. Interdimensional portals open. Ancient evils awaken. The fabric of reality tears. Baby ducks merge into a giant karate-chopping duck man. A cassette tape comes to life and terrorizes the park. Death himself shows up to play arm wrestling. And then, and this is the key, everything resets. The crisis is resolved. The park is saved. And Mordecai and Rigby are right back where they started. Ready to be given another mundane task. Ready to screw it up. Ready to face another escalation. The boulder rolls back down the hill. This is the myth of Sisyphus playing out in 11-minute increments, 244 times. And here's what gets me. Here's what I keep coming back to. The characters don't despair. They don't break. They don't one day sit down and say, why do we keep doing this? Why does every simple task end in near-apocalyptic catastrophe? What's the point? They just keep going. They wake up the next morning, and they go to the park, and they do it all again. That is absurdist heroism. That is Camus' entire philosophy, animated and broadcast on Cartoon Network at 8 p.m. on Monday nights. Let me give you a specific example, because I think the details matter here. A Bunch of Baby Ducks. Season 2, Episode 23. The task is simple. Clean out the park fountain. That's it. Drain it. Scrub it. Done. Except when Mordecai and Rigby drain the fountain, they find a group of baby ducks living in it, and the ducks imprint on them. They learn to talk. They learn karate. They start imitating everything Mordecai and Rigby do, including karate chopping things. Eventually, a duck collector shows up who wants to kidnap them, and the baby ducks, I am not making this up, merge into a giant humanoid duck creature and karate chop the villain in half. And then the ducks leave with their mother, and the fountain still needs to be cleaned. That's absurdism. The task was clean the fountain. The journey involved sentient infant waterfowl forming a Voltron-like combat entity. And the outcome is, the fountain still needs to be cleaned. The boulder rolled back down. Or take This Is My Jam, Season 2, Episode 13. Rigby finds an old cassette tape. And I love that it's a cassette tape, because this show's relationship with obsolete media formats is its own entire philosophical conversation we'll get to later. And the song on it, Summertime Loving, Loving in the Summer, Time, gets stuck in his head so thoroughly that it literally manifests as a physical entity, a walking, dancing cassette tape terrorizing the park. And the only way to defeat it is to write a better song. So Benson, who, as we'll discuss, is a failed drummer haunted by his own lost potential, Benson plays the drums to help create a new song. Oh, snap! That destroys the earworm. Think about that. A catchy song becomes an existential threat. Music as literal contagion. And the cure is more music. Better music. Creation as the answer to destruction. And then the episode ends, and everything's back to normal, and nobody talks about the sentient cassette tape ever again. Camus said that the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a person's heart. Regular Show says the absurdity itself is enough to fill an episode. And the return to normalcy isn't defeat. It's acceptance. It's the characters unconsciously embracing the absurd cycle of their lives and finding within that cycle friendship and jokes and free cake and video games and all the small pleasures that make the repetition bearable. And honestly, I think that's a more accessible version of absurdist philosophy than anything Camus himself ever wrote. Because Camus was asking you to imagine Sisyphus happy in the abstract. Regular show shows you. It shows you characters who are, functionally, Sisyphus, pushing the same boulder every week, watching it roll back down, waking up and doing it again. And they're not miserable. They're having a great time. They're eating pizza and playing video games and going to concerts and falling in love. One must imagine Mordecai and Rigby happy. And you don't have to imagine it, because they are. But hold on, I don't want to move on from the absurd just yet, because I think the escalation formula deserves more attention. Because it's not just a comedy device, it's a worldview. Let me walk you through a few more examples so you can feel the pattern in your bones. Rigby's Body, Season 1, Episode 11. The task: don't eat too much junk food. Simple, right? Except Rigby, being Rigby, goes on a junk food bender after learning that snack bar food is free for employees. And his body, his actual physical body, gets so fed up that it literally separates from him. Rigby becomes a disembodied consciousness floating through the air while his body walks around on its own, eventually getting taken over by a bodybuilder's disembodied consciousness. If Rigby doesn't get his body back by sunset, he'll be a floating consciousness forever. Just sit with the philosophical implications of that for a second. The show, in Season 1, Episode 11, presented us with a Cartesian mind-body split as a comedic premise. Descartes spent decades wrestling with the relationship between mind and body, writing entire treatises about how a non-physical consciousness could interact with a physical form. And regular show just does it, as a bit. Rigby's consciousness separates from his body because he ate too many hot dogs. Descartes is somewhere screaming, and the resolution? Rigby has to prove to his body that he'll take better care of it. He has to negotiate with his own physical form. He has to make a commitment to treat his body with respect, which is, when you strip away the comedy, basically a meditation on the relationship between the self and the physical world. The body isn't just a vehicle for the mind. It has needs. It has demands. It can leave. And if you don't honor the relationship between who you are and what you are, you lose both. That's in 11 minutes on Cartoon Network. For children. Or think about the best VHS in the world. Season 3. Mordecai and Rigby have to return an overdue VHS tape to a video store, or they'll be banned from renting movies. The task is almost comically simple. Just return the tape. Just drive to the store and hand them a cassette. Except the tape turns out to be the best VHS in the world, and everyone who watches it becomes obsessed with keeping it. The tape has a kind of gravitational pull. It generates attachment, desire, the need to possess and control. I mean, if that isn't a parable about consumerism and the way objects colonize our consciousness, I don't know what is. The tape is a MacGuffin that functions as a mirror for human desire. The characters don't want the tape because of what's on it. They want it because wanting it is what the tape does to you. It transforms need into identity. You don't just want to watch the tape. You become a person defined by your relationship to the tape. Sound familiar? Sound like anything in your life? Your phone, maybe? That thing you can't put down, even though you know it's not making you happier? Camus would say, the tape is the boulder, the wanting is the hill, and the characters push and push and push, and at the end of the episode, the tape is returned. The desire evaporates, and they're back at the park, ready to become attached to the next thing. The cycle continues. And then there's Skips versus Technology. Season 3, Episode 15. The task: fix a computer error. Error number 219. Mordecai and Rigby can't figure it out, so they ask Skips. Skips, the immortal Yeti who has defeated cosmic entities, who has fought Clorgbane, who has navigated supernatural dimensions. Skips can't fix a computer. He's been alive since the 1700s, and he cannot figure out how to troubleshoot a printer error. There's something so beautiful and so sad about this. The most competent character in the entire show, defeated by technology. Skips goes to the library to learn about computers. He tries. He really tries. But by the time he gets back, The error has evolved into Error 220, a virus called Doom-mageddon that starts digitizing everything. And his old friend Tecmo, a Revolutionary War-era buddy who has merged himself with technology, has to step in to help. The absurd escalation here isn't just physical, it's temporal. It's about the gap between Skip's ancient knowledge and the modern world. It's about how even immortality can't prepare you for everything. It's about how the universe keeps changing, keeps presenting new challenges, keeps rolling new boulders up new hills. Skips has been doing this for centuries. He'll be doing it for centuries more. And every century, the boulders change shape, and he has to learn a new way to push. That's Sisyphus in a tech support call, and it's hilarious. And it's also deeply, deeply existential. The show did this every single week, 244 times. The mundane becomes the cosmic, becomes the mundane again. The cycle continues, and the characters, our absurdist heroes, keep showing up, keep trying, keep failing, keep laughing about it over pizza. I keep thinking about something Camus wrote, that the absurd does not liberate, it binds. What he meant was that recognizing the absurdity of life doesn't free you from having to live it. You still have to get up in the morning. You still have to push the boulder. The absurd just means you do it without the comforting illusion that it means something. And Regular Show captures this perfectly, because its characters never have a philosophical awakening. They never realize they're in an absurd cycle. They just live in it, fully and completely. And the show trusts the audience to see the pattern even if the characters don't. That's sophisticated storytelling. That's respecting your audience's intelligence while never being preachy about it. And that, to me, is why Regular Show's absurdism feels different from other shows that traffic in the weird and surreal. Adventure Time is surreal. Flapjack is surreal. But Regular Show's surrealism is specifically, structurally, absurdist. It's not random. It follows a pattern. And the pattern is Camus' boulder, rolling down the hill every single time. Alright, I want to shift gears here, because I've been talking about the slackers, the freedom seekers, the absurdist heroes. But Regular Show has another kind of character. A character who is, in many ways, the philosophical opposite of Mordecai and Rigby. And I think he's one of the most tragic figures in all of animated television. I'm talking about Benson. Benson, the gumball machine, the park manager, the guy who screams, "You're fired," approximately 400 times across the series, and never actually follows through. Voiced brilliantly by Sam Marin, who also voices Pops and Muscle Man. And I just want to take a second to appreciate that Sam Marin, who is Quintel's friend and classmate at Cal Arts, voices 3 of the 7 main characters with completely distinct personalities. And that before Regular Show was greenlit, he was working as an animator at Walt Disney Animation Studios. The range on this man. But back to Benson, because Benson is fascinating, and Benson is heartbreaking, and Benson is Friedrich Nietzsche's last man. Now, Nietzsche is one of those philosophers that everyone thinks they know, but most people actually misunderstand. He gets associated with nihilism, with the God is dead thing, with this kind of edgy, destructive worldview. But Nietzsche wasn't a nihilist. He was terrified of nihilism. His whole project was about finding a way past it. And one of his key concepts was what he called ressentiment, which is French for resentment, but it means something more specific in Nietzsche's work. Ressentiment is what happens when a person who feels powerless starts to define their entire identity through their bitterness toward those who seem free. The last man, in Nietzsche's philosophy, is the person who has given up on greatness. The person who settles for comfort, for security, for the small, safe life. The person who used to want something more, but has convinced themselves that wanting more is foolish, that ambition is naivety, that the people who still dream are idiots who don't understand how the world works. That's Benson. Here's what we know about Benson's backstory, and it's one of the richest in the entire show. In 150 Piece Kit, Season 4, Episode 5, we learn that Benson was once the drummer for a rock band called Heir to the Throne, and he wasn't just any drummer. He performed the legendary drum solo on a 150-piece drum kit on the band's debut album. This was his moment. This was his shot at the will to power, at self-actualization, at becoming who he was meant to be. And his bandmates fired him. They kicked him out after only 6 months because they were jealous that his drum solo was going to overshadow the rest of the group. They replaced him with a machine, the Drumatron 6, a literal machine. They chose efficiency and predictability over human artistry and passion, and the band went on to become hugely successful, while Benson faded. And if that weren't enough, we also learn, and this hit me hard when I first watched it, that Benson grew up in a verbally abusive household. His father would tell him he had no talent. Those words, "You don't have any talent," rattling around inside a kid who loved drumming, who poured himself into it, who was genuinely exceptional at it. And then the world confirmed what his father said. The band kicked him out. The machine replaced him. His talent wasn't enough. So what does Benson do? He becomes a park manager. He trades the drum kit for a clipboard. He trades creative expression for administrative control. And he pours all of his frustrated, thwarted energy into managing a park where nothing works, where his employees don't respect him, where the same disasters happen over and over and over again. And he is so angry. That's ressentiment. Benson doesn't just dislike Mordecai and Rigby because they're lazy. He resents them because they're free. They do whatever they want. They don't care about the rules. They don't worry about job security, or performance reviews, or impressing anyone. They live with a kind of careless, reckless authenticity that Benson once had and lost. And every time he sees them goofing off, every time he watches them choose fun over duty, it's a mirror showing him the life he could have lived if he'd fought harder, if the world had been kinder, if his father hadn't broken something inside him before the band even got the chance. There's this episode, This Is My Jam, the same one I mentioned earlier, where Benson plays the drums to help defeat the earworm. And he's incredible. He's still got it. The talent is still there, buried under layers of frustration and routine and fear. And for just a moment, you see the person Benson used to be, the artist, the creator, the guy who could play a 150-piece drum solo and make the world stop spinning. And then the episode ends, and he goes back to managing the park and yelling at Mordecai and Rigby and being the last man again. That's one of the saddest things I've ever seen in a cartoon, and I mean that sincerely, because the show doesn't treat it as sad in the moment. It's played for comedy. Benson's rage is funny. His impotence is funny. The gumball machine turning red and screaming is funny. But underneath the comedy, there's this deep, aching portrait of a man who gave up on himself. A man who took his will to power, his creative drive, his passion, his ambition, and traded it for a whistle and a clipboard. And I think Nietzsche would look at Benson and say, this is what happens when you let the world break you. This is what the last man looks like. Not someone evil, not someone hateful, just someone who stopped trying to be great and started trying to just get through the day. There's another dimension to Benson that I want to explore, because I think it deepens the Nietzschean reading considerably. Think about Busted Cart, Season 3, Episode 26. Mr. Maillard orders Benson to drive the busted golf cart to a distant dealership before the warranty expires. Simple errand, long drive. And Mordecai and Rigby stow away in the back of his truck. When Benson discovers them, he's furious. But then something happens that rarely happens on the show. Benson actually explains himself. He tells Mordecai and Rigby that they don't seem to understand that actions have consequences. He tells them that he cares about keeping his job because it's all he has. And in that moment, the comedy peels away, and you see the real Benson underneath. Not the screaming boss, not the red-faced gumball machine, but a man who is afraid. Afraid of losing the one thing he has left. Afraid that if he loses the park, he'll have nothing. No band, no music, no identity at all. Nietzsche talked about the will to power not as a desire for domination, that's the popular misreading, but as the fundamental human drive to create, to express, to impose your vision on the world. It's the force that makes artists make art, that makes builders build, that makes dreamers dream. And when the will to power is thwarted, when the world says, no, your drum solo doesn't count, no, your talent isn't enough, it doesn't disappear. It curdles. It turns inward. It becomes what Nietzsche called the will to nothingness. The desire to control everything because you can't create anything. That's Benson's management style in a nutshell. He can't make music anymore, so he makes schedules. He can't perform drum solos, so he performs employee evaluations. He can't create beauty, so he creates order. And the control, the obsessive, exhausting, futile attempt to make Mordecai and Rigby do their jobs, is a substitute for creation. It's the will to power, redirected and diminished, turned into something small and administrative, and ultimately pointless. Because here's the thing, Benson's control doesn't work. He tells Mordecai and Rigby to do things, and they don't do them. He threatens to fire them, and he never follows through. He creates rules, and the rules get broken. The universe itself seems to conspire against his desire for order. Every episode, supernatural chaos erupts and destroys whatever structure he's tried to impose. Benson is Sisyphus too, but his boulder isn't a task. His boulder is the illusion of control, and it rolls back down every single time. And I think there's something to be said about the relationship between Benson and Mordecai, specifically. Because Mordecai represents everything Benson used to be, and everything Benson is afraid of. Mordecai is a creative person who abandoned his art. Benson is a creative person who had his art taken from him. They're mirrors of each other. Two people who could have been artists, trapped in a park, managing their fear of failure in opposite ways. Mordecai avoids the fear by refusing to try. Benson manages the fear by trying to control everything else. There's a moment in Weekend at Benson's, Season 3, Episode 12, the one where Mordecai and Rigby accidentally knock Benson unconscious and have to drag his limp body to a party to save face, where we see Benson's apartment. And it's sad. It's neat and organized and completely devoid of personality. There's no drum kit, no music, no evidence that this person was ever anything other than a park manager. Benson has purged himself of his past. He's not just the last man, he's a man who has erased his own history. But, and this is where regular show is smarter than you'd think, the show doesn't leave Benson there. Not entirely. Because over 8 seasons, Benson does grow. Slowly. Painfully. He finds moments of connection. He falls in love. He finds pride in the park, not as a replacement for his dreams, but as something worth caring about on its own terms. And in the finale's flash forward, Benson is still running the park. But he's happy. He chose to stay. And there's a difference between staying because you're afraid to leave, and staying because you've found something worth staying for. That's Nietzsche's amor fati, love of fate. The acceptance of your life as it is, not as a defeat, but as your life. The one you've got, the one you're living. Alright, I need to take you somewhere different now, somewhere quieter, because we've been talking about freedom and absurdity and resentment. But there's a character in this show who embodies something much older, much heavier, much more sorrowful. We need to talk about Skips. Skips, voiced by Mark Hamill. Yes, Luke Skywalker is the voice of the immortal Yeti who fixes everything at the park, and that casting is so perfect it hurts. Skips is, on paper, the most reliable character in regular show. He's the problem solver. When things escalate beyond anyone's ability to handle, Skips steps in. He knows ancient rituals. He has connections with the Guardians of Eternal Youth. He's fought cosmic entities. He's been alive for centuries. He is, in every practical sense, the bedrock of the park, and he is profoundly, irreversibly alone. The philosopher I keep connecting to Skips is Soren Kierkegaard, the 19th century Danish thinker, who is often called the father of existentialism. Kierkegaard was obsessed with what he called the stages of existence. He proposed 3, the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. And the movement between them wasn't smooth or logical. It required what he famously called a leap of faith. The aesthetic stage is about pleasure, living for the moment, sensation and experience and novelty. Sound familiar? That's young Skips, or rather young Walks, which was his original name. In Skip's story, Season 5, Episode 22, one of the highest rated episodes in the entire series with a 9.7 on IMDb, we learn that before he was immortal, Walks was a teenage Yeti who was reckless, impulsive, fun-loving. He picked fights. He took risks. He lived in Kierkegaard's aesthetic stage, pure immediacy, pure sensation, no concern for consequences. And then he met Mona. Mona, sometimes called Desdemona, was the love of his life, and she changed him. She showed him that there was more to life than fighting and thrills. She moved him, to borrow Kierkegaard's framework, from the aesthetic stage toward the ethical stage, the stage of commitment, of responsibility, of caring about something beyond your own pleasure. They used to skip together. That's where his name comes from. They would skip instead of walk, and it was their thing, this silly, joyful, intimate thing that belonged just to them. And then she died. During a fight with Clorgbane, a bully who would become a recurring cosmic threat, Mona was killed. Sealing debris fell on her. The Guardians of Eternal Youth pulled her locket from the rubble, and Walks made a choice. He accepted immortality from the Guardians, specifically to be the one who fights Clorgbane whenever he returns, and he vowed to always skip for the rest of his existence, as a memorial, as a promise, as a way of keeping her alive in the only way he could. I'm going to be honest with you. I teared up the first time I watched that episode, and I'm not embarrassed about that. Because what that episode does in 11 minutes is something most dramas can't do in an entire season. It takes a character you thought you knew, the reliable handyman, the guy who just fixes stuff, and it reveals an ocean of grief underneath. Every time Skip skips, he's mourning. Every bounce of his step is a love letter to someone who's been gone for centuries. And that's where Kierkegaard's third stage comes in, the religious stage. Now, Kierkegaard didn't mean religious in the sense of going to church. He meant it in the sense of a leap of faith, a commitment to something that goes beyond rational justification, something that you can't prove is worth doing, that you can't argue is logical, but that you do anyway, because the alternative is emptiness. Skip's immortality is his leap of faith. Think about what it costs him. He has to watch everyone he cares about age and die. He has to perform a ceremonial dance every single year on his birthday to maintain his immortality. We learn this in Free Cake, Season 1, Episode 5, where Mordecai and Rigby nearly kill him by interrupting the ritual. Every year, without fail, Skips has to choose to keep going, choose to stay immortal, choose to endure the weight of endless time. Why? Why would anyone choose that? Because he made a promise. Because Clorgbane will return. Because the park needs him. Because in some deep, irrational Kierkegaardian sense, continuing to exist is his way of honoring what he lost. The leap of faith isn't the initial decision to become immortal. The leap of faith is every single day after, when he wakes up and chooses to keep going, despite knowing that everyone he loves will eventually be gone. There's a moment in Skip's Strikes where Death tries to reveal to Skip's friends that his real name is Walks, and Skip stops him. He doesn't want them to know. He doesn't want to explain the centuries of grief that live inside that name change. And I think that's so human, or, well, so Yeti. This idea that some pain is so personal, so deep, that you can't share it. You just carry it. You carry it, and you skip instead of walk, and you fix the lawnmower, and you defeat the evil wizard, and you show up every single day, and nobody knows why you're really there. Kierkegaard wrote about the Knight of Faith, the person who has made the leap and lives in the world as though everything is fine, carrying an infinite weight that nobody else can see. That's Skips. He is regular show's Knight of Faith. And I want to dig into this further, because I think the show explores Kierkegaard's 3 stages through Skips more thoroughly than most people realize. The aesthetic stage, pure pleasure, pure immediacy. That's Walks as a teenager. Fighting, roughhousing, hanging out with Tecmo, doing reckless things for the thrill of it. There's no concern for the future, no commitment to anything beyond the next adrenaline rush. And Kierkegaard would say this stage is ultimately empty, not because pleasure is bad, but because a life built entirely on immediacy collapses when the immediate moment turns painful. And it always turns painful eventually. The ethical stage, duty, responsibility, commitment, that emerges when Walks meets Mona. He starts caring about something beyond himself. He starts wanting to be a better person, not for an abstract moral reason, but because love demands it. Love is the thing that pulls most people out of the aesthetic stage, and Walks is no different. He commits to Mona. He skips with her. He plans a future. And then the ethical stage fails. Because Kierkegaard argued that the ethical stage always fails. Not because ethics are wrong, but because the ethical demands of the universe are impossible to fully meet. You try to do the right thing. You try to live up to your commitments, and eventually something happens that breaks the system. Your girlfriend dies in a fight you were trying to win. The ethical framework. Be good, do right, and good things will follow. shatters against the reality that the universe is not just. And that's when the leap of faith becomes necessary. That's when you move from the ethical to the religious. Not because you've figured out a better system, not because you've found proof that things will be okay, but because the alternative, despair, nihilism, giving up, is worse than believing. Skip's immortality is his act of faith. He can't bring Mona back. He can't undo what happened. He can't make the universe fair, but he can choose to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep carrying his loss as a vow rather than a wound. And that choice, irrational, unjustified by any evidence, sustained only by sheer will, that's the leap. There's something else about Skips that I think connects to Kierkegaard's concept of anxiety. Kierkegaard said that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, the feeling you get when you realize that your life is your own to shape, and there's nothing stopping you from doing anything at all. It's different from fear, which has a specific object. Anxiety is about the sheer openness of possibility. And for Skips, the anxiety must be staggering, because his possibilities aren't limited by a human lifespan. He has infinite time, infinite choices, infinite potential directions. And that infinitude, that absolute freedom, is its own kind of prison. Because when you have infinite time, what does any single moment matter? When you've lived through centuries, what makes this Tuesday different from last Tuesday or next Tuesday? How do you maintain care, investment, presence, when you know that the present moment is just one of an endless sequence? Kierkegaard would say, through the leap of faith, through the irrational, sustained, daily commitment to act as though this moment matters, even when the infinite horizon of your existence whispers that it doesn't. Every episode where Skips shows up to fix something, every time he rolls up his sleeves and deals with whatever supernatural catastrophe has erupted this week, he's making that leap. He's choosing to care about 11 minutes of a life that stretches to infinity. He's choosing to invest in people he will outlive. He's choosing presence over the temptation of existential detachment. And the show gives us one small, beautiful detail that encapsulates all of this. Skips always brings his boombox. Have you noticed that? He has this old-school boombox that he listens to, and it plays this calm, contemplative music while he works out or meditates. It's his anchor, his ritual, his way of being present in the moment, even while carrying the weight of eternity. I think about Marcus Aurelius. I know I'm mixing philosophers here, but bear with me. Marcus Aurelius, who was emperor of Rome and wrote his meditations as a way of centering himself amid the chaos of ruling an empire. The boombox is Skip's meditations. It's his daily practice of being here, now, in this moment, despite everything. And here's the thing that gets me about the finale. In the flash forward at the end of a regular epic final battle, we see what happens to everyone after the show ends. Mordecai becomes an artist. Rigby marries Eileen. Muscleman has a daughter. Benson keeps running the park. And Skips? Skips is still there, still at the park, still skipping, still keeping his promise. And he will be there long after all of them are gone. The show doesn't call attention to this. It doesn't linger on it. It just shows you Skips, still skipping, in a world that has moved on around him. And if that doesn't break your heart a little, I don't know what to tell you. Let me take a breath here, because we've been in some heavy territory, and I think it's time to talk about someone who exists on the complete opposite end of the emotional spectrum. Someone who is, in my view, one of the most philosophically pure characters ever created in any medium. Let me talk about Pops. Pops Maillard, born Megacranus, lollipop-shaped, childlike, innocent, happy about literally everything. His catchphrase is, "good show," and he means it every single time. Voiced by Sam Marin with this high-breathy, delighted quality that makes everything Pop says sound like he's discovering the world for the first time. And for 7 seasons, that's what we think Pops is. He's the sweet, naive, slightly out-of-touch older gentleman who technically owns the park through his adoptive father, Mr. Maillard, and who seems to exist in a state of perpetual, gentle wonder. He's a comedy character. He doesn't understand modern references. He gets excited about butterflies. He's simple, except he's not. He's not simple at all, because in Season 8, the show reveals something extraordinary. Pops isn't just an eccentric old man. He is Megacranus, the chosen one, the embodiment of pure good, born on a planet called Lollyland. He has an evil twin brother, Anti-Pops, also known as Malum Cranus, and the two of them have been fighting each other in an endlessly repeating cycle since the beginning of the universe. Every time they fight, it ends in a stalemate, and the universe resets. Nobody knows exactly how many cycles there have been, but based on the tattoos on Earl, a character who keeps track, it's probably been about 20 times. 20 times. The universe has been born and destroyed and born again 20 times because of this fight. And I want to connect this to Plato, because I think Pops is the closest thing I've ever seen to Plato's form of the good. Plato believed, and this is roughly 2,500 years of philosophical tradition we're compressing here, so bear with me. Plato believed that behind the messy, imperfect world we can see and touch, there exists a realm of perfect forms, perfect, abstract ideals, the form of justice, the form of beauty, the form of truth, and at the top of the whole hierarchy, the most important form of all, the form of the good. The good is what gives everything else its meaning. It's the sun that illuminates the cave. If you know the allegory of the cave, the form of the good is the actual sun outside the cave that the freed prisoner finally sees. Pops is the form of the good wearing a top hat. He's not good because he tries to be good. He's not good because he follows rules or has a moral code or works at being virtuous. He's good because goodness is what he is. It's his essence, his nature. It radiates from him unconsciously, effortlessly, in every interaction, every good show, every moment of guileless delight. He is, in the most literal Platonic sense, goodness itself made manifest. And here's where it gets heavy, because the show tells us that Pops, as the embodiment of pure good, exists in eternal opposition to Anti-Pops, the embodiment of pure evil, and they've been locked in this cycle forever. Good and evil, battling, stalemate, reset, repeat, and every time, it ends the same way. Nobody wins. The universe just starts over. That's Plato's metaphysics playing out as a cosmic action narrative on a cartoon show that also has episodes about arm wrestling contests with death. But Pops breaks the cycle. In the finale, in the final minutes of the final episode of the entire series, Pops does something that none of the previous cycles produced. He doesn't try to defeat Anti-Pops through force. He doesn't try to overpower evil with good. Instead, he grabs his brother and flies into the sun. He sacrifices himself. He chooses to end his own existence, to break the cycle, to end the eternal repetition, to give the universe and his friends a chance to actually live their lives without the looming threat of cosmic reset. And in their final moments, as they're flying into the sun, Anti-Pops reconciles with Pops. The embodiment of evil, in the face of total annihilation, finds peace. The brothers embrace, and they are gone. I want to connect this to something beyond Plato now, because I think Pops' sacrifice resonates with multiple philosophical traditions simultaneously. In Plato's framework, the form of the good is the highest reality, and Pops, by sacrificing himself, demonstrates that the good is not something that needs to triumph over evil in a competition. The good transcends competition entirely. It gives itself. It illuminates by burning. But there's also something deeply Christological about it. The innocent, the pure, the good, sacrificing themselves to redeem the world. And something Buddhist, the letting go of the self, the dissolution of the ego, the recognition that attachment to the cycle of existence is itself the source of suffering. Pops breaks samsara. He steps off the wheel, and in doing so, he frees everyone. And I just want to sit with that for a second, because regular show is a show that started with two guys playing rock, paper, scissors over who has to buy snacks, ends with a character sacrificing himself to break an infinite cosmic cycle of rebirth. The tonal range of this show is, honestly, unlike anything else I can think of. And the fact that it lands, the fact that Pops' death feels earned and devastating and beautiful rather than ridiculous, is a miracle of storytelling. The episode that sets this up is Cheer Up Pops, the 25th episode of Season 8, airing the same day as the finale, January 16th, 2017. Pops is devastated because he knows what's coming. He knows he's going to have to fight his brother. He knows the stakes. And his friends, the park crew, try to cheer him up by recording their memories onto Blu-ray discs. They literally archive their experiences together, their friendship, their history, so that something survives no matter what happens. And that act, the act of recording, of preserving, of saying, this mattered, we were here, we loved each other, that's the human response to the platonic tragedy of Pops' existence. Pops is the form of the good, and he has to go. But the memories stay. The impressions of goodness, the shadows on the cave wall, remain even after the form itself is extinguished. Plato would have understood this. The forms are eternal, but our access to them is temporary. We get glimpses. We get moments of beauty, moments of truth, moments of pure goodness, and then they pass. And all we're left with is the memory, the shadow, the Blu-ray disc buried in the ground that might someday remind someone that something beautiful once existed. Okay, I need to shift gears again, because I've been in the philosophical stratosphere, and I want to come back down to earth. I want to talk about someone who, on the surface, seems like the least philosophical character in the entire show. Someone who starts as a one-note joke and becomes, over 8 seasons, one of the most complete character arcs in the series. I'm talking about Muscle Man, Mitch Sorenstein, the green-skinned, overweight, shirtless guy whose entire comedic identity in the early seasons is built on one joke. My mom. He tells a joke, you think the punchline is going to be about someone else, and he says, my mom. That's it. That's the bit. And for the first season or two, that's pretty much all Muscle Man is. He's the annoying coworker. He's the guy everyone tolerates, but nobody really chooses to spend time with. He's background noise. And then the show starts building him out. Slowly, carefully, layer by layer. And what emerges is something I think we can genuinely understand through Hegel's dialectic. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and I apologize in advance for how German philosophy sounds at 2 a.m. Hegel had this idea called the dialectic. It works like this. You start with a thesis, an initial state. Then you encounter its antithesis, the opposite. And through the conflict between thesis and antithesis, you arrive at a synthesis, a new state that incorporates elements of both, but is more complete than either one alone. Muscle Man's thesis is the annoying bro, the my mom jokes, the crude humor, the surface level obnoxiousness. That's who he appears to be. His antithesis emerges in episodes that reveal devastating emotional depth. Trucker Hall of Fame, Season 3, Episode 30, is the one that first cracked him open for me. Muscle Man's father dies, gets mauled after putting a cactus under what turned out to be an actual bear, and Muscle Man is destroyed. He vows to spread his father's ashes, contained in a trucker hat, at the Trucker Hall of Fame. But then comes the twist. Muscle Man's father wasn't a trucker. He was a forklift driver. He'd been lying about it his whole life. And the crew discovers a letter from Muscle Dad that reads, and I'm paraphrasing because the exact phrasing matters less than the meaning, that his father knew the world was harsh, and he pranked Muscle Man all his life to toughen him up for when he was gone. And there's this moment where Muscle Man, standing in front of his friends, says something like, my old man was a screw-up. And let's face it, so am I. I'm overweight. I work in a lame park, and you guys are my only friends. But the one thing that a Sorenstein almost never screws up is a prank. Look, I'm not going to pretend that's Shakespeare, but in context, delivered with that vulnerability, it's one of the most honest pieces of self-assessment any character in this show ever makes. Muscle Man sees himself clearly. He knows who he is. He knows his limitations. And he chooses to honor his father by honoring the one thing they share, the prank, the joke, the refusal to take life too seriously, even when it's breaking your heart. That's the antithesis, the emotional core underneath the crude exterior. And the synthesis, the Hegelian resolution, is what Muscle Man becomes by the end of the series. He's still the my mom guy. He's still crude and loud and inappropriate. But he's also the guy who marries Starla, who has a daughter, who learned how to express his feelings because Starla demanded it of him. Here's the thing about Starla. She first appears in Muscle Woman, Season 2, Episode 14, and she breaks up with Muscle Man because he can't express himself emotionally. He's devastated. He can't function. And the only way they get back together is when he finally, publicly, vulnerably, says how he feels. Starla doesn't want him to change who he is. She just wants him to be honest about who he is. And that's the synthesis. Not replacing the bro with the sensitive guy. not killing the my mom jokes to make room for feelings, integrating both, being the complete person, the synthesis, and the proposal episode, The End of Muscle Man, Season 6, Episode 5, is pure Hegel. Muscle Man tricks everyone into thinking he's dying. He makes them fulfill his bucket list. And then he reveals that what's actually dying is his bachelorhood. He's proposing to Starla, and he says he's going to give up being Muscle Man and become plain old Mitch Sorenstein. But Starla says no. She rejects the proposal, not because she doesn't want to marry him, but because she fell in love with Muscle Man, not Mitch. She doesn't want the thesis to be destroyed. She wants the synthesis. She wants all of him. And when he understands that, when he promises not to change, to just be who he is, completely, she says yes. Tell me that's not dialectical resolution. Tell me that's not thesis and antithesis, finding synthesis through love. I dare you. And the rest of the park crew? They're all furious at him for the fake death prank, except High Five Ghost, who just gives him a high five. Because that's what High Five Ghost does. And honestly, there's probably a whole philosophical essay to be written about High Five Ghost as a figure of pure, uncomplicated loyalty. But we don't have time for that tonight. Maybe another video. But wait, I want to talk about Muscle Man's relationship with his father one more time, because I think it illuminates the dialectic in a different way. In Trucker Hall of Fame, when Muscle Man discovers his father was a forklift driver, not a trucker, his initial reaction is rage, betrayal. His father lied to him. His father built Muscle Man's entire self-image on a foundation of deception. Muscle Man defined himself through his father's legacy, the trucking, the toughness, the pranking tradition. And now that legacy is revealed to be a fabrication. But then he reads the letter, and the letter recontextualizes everything. His father didn't lie out of malice. He lied out of love. He wanted Muscle Man to be tougher than the world would make him. He wanted to give his son a myth to live inside, because myths are stronger than facts when you're trying to survive. And Muscle Man's response, his decision to honor his father's memory by spreading the ashes at the Trucker Hall of Fame anyway, even knowing his father was never a trucker, that's the synthesis at a deeper level. It's not about whether the facts are true. It's about whether the love is true. The trucking was a lie. The love was real. And Muscle Man chooses to honor the love, not the lie, but not by denying the lie either. He holds both. He carries both. The fact that his father was a screw-up, and the fact that his father loved him. That's Hegel. That's thesis and antithesis, held simultaneously in a synthesis that doesn't resolve the contradiction, but contains it. And I think there's a broader point here about regular show and its relationship to truth. The show is full of lies, deceptions, and myths. Skips lied about his name. Rigby lied about Mordecai's college letter. Benson lies to himself about being content. Muscle Man's father lied about being a trucker. Pop's entire identity was a mystery, even to himself. The characters are constantly hiding things from each other and from themselves. But the show doesn't condemn lying exactly. It treats it as human, as something people do because the truth is too heavy to carry all at once. And the growth in the show comes not from never lying, but from eventually facing the truth you've been hiding from. The deceptions are temporary. The truth always comes out. And when it does, the characters have to decide, do I let the truth destroy the relationship, or do I let the relationship survive the truth? Every time, they choose the relationship. Every time. That's regular show's deepest moral commitment, that bonds between people are more durable than the deceptions that test them. And I think Hegel would say that's the highest form of synthesis. Not the resolution of opposites into a clean, comfortable unity, but the decision to carry contradictions together, to hold truth and love simultaneously, even when they seem irreconcilable. Okay, I want to talk about the Terror Tales of the Park episodes briefly, because they're actually relevant here in a way that might surprise you. These are the annual Halloween specials, anthology episodes where the characters tell each other scary stories. J.G. Quintel was inspired by Treehouse of Horror from The Simpsons, and Regular Show ran 6 of these specials from Season 3 through Season 8. And here's what I find philosophically interesting about them. They're the only episodes where the characters can die, really die. In the non-canon horror stories, the regular rules don't apply. Mordecai can get his face ripped off. Rigby can be transformed into a house by an evil wizard. Characters face genuine mortal consequences that the main continuity never allows. And I think the show needed these episodes, philosophically speaking, because the main show operates under an implicit guarantee of safety. No matter how bad things get, the status quo will be restored. The boulder rolls back down, but nobody gets crushed by it. The Terror Tales episodes remove that guarantee. They say, what if the boulder did crush you? What if the absurd cycle ended not in reset, but in annihilation? These episodes are memento mori in their purest form. They remind the characters and the audience of the mortality that the main show holds at bay. They're the nightmares that make the ordinary episodes feel like dreams. And by confining death to a contained, non-canon space, the show actually strengthens the main narrative's engagement with mortality. Because you know what death looks like in this world. You've seen it in the horror episodes. And the fact that it doesn't happen in the main continuity doesn't mean it can't. It just means the characters are lucky. And luck, as any stoic will tell you, is temporary. Alright, I want to zoom out now. I've been talking about individual characters, individual arcs, individual philosophical traditions. But I think there's a larger philosophical framework that encompasses the entire show, and I want to name it. The park is Epicurus's garden. Epicurus was a Greek philosopher, born 341 BC, died 270 BC, and he's one of the most misunderstood thinkers in the Western tradition. People think Epicureanism is about pleasure-seeking, about hedonism, about eating grapes on a chaise lounge while someone fans you with a palm frond. But that's not what Epicurus actually taught. What he taught was something much quieter, much humbler, much more beautiful. Epicurus said that the highest good was ataraxia, tranquility, freedom from anxiety, and the way to achieve it wasn't through luxury or excess, but through friendship, simple pleasures, and retreat from the chaos of public life. He literally established a garden, the Garden of Epicurus, where he and his friends lived together, shared meals, talked philosophy, and enjoyed each other's company away from the noise of Athenian politics. Now tell me, that doesn't sound exactly like the park. Think about it. The park is a space apart from the wider world. It's where this odd collection of people, a blue jay, a raccoon, a gumball machine, a yeti, a ghost, a lollipop man, a green-skinned guy, come together and form a community. They're not there because of ambition. They're not chasing wealth or fame or power. They're there because, well, some of them are there because they don't have anywhere else to go. And some of them are there because this is where they belong. And what do? They eat together. They play games. They have arguments that blow over by the next episode. They face external threats together. And always, always come back to the same place, the same rhythms, the same comfortable routines. Pizza on the couch, video games in the living room, Benson yelling, Pops being delighted by a butterfly, Skips fixing whatever needs fixing. These are Epicurean pleasures, not grand pleasures, not the pleasures of conquest or achievement, the pleasures of friendship, of routine, of belonging. And the show defends this vision of the good life against constant external threats. Every episode, something tries to disrupt the park. Villains, supernatural forces, the literal personification of death, the threat of the freeway being built through it in Exit 9B, the Season 4 premiere, where Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr. tries to destroy the park to build an exit ramp as revenge for Mordecai and Rigby defeating his father in a video game high-score competition. That episode brought back every villain from the show's history and required the park crew to summon every ally they'd ever made. Gary, Death, Tecmo, the god of basketball, the guardians of eternal youth, to save their home, and they do save it. They always save it, because the garden is worth defending. The community, the friendship, the simple life, that's what matters. That's what the show keeps insisting matters, even as the stakes escalate to cosmic proportions. And think about the dynamics of this community. They argue, sure. Benson screams at Mordecai and Rigby. Muscle Man annoys everyone. Rigby starts fights. There's friction and conflict in every episode, but nobody leaves. Nobody gets permanently expelled from the garden. The arguments are surface-level disturbances on a deep, still lake of belonging. Because the essential Epicurean insight is that friendship doesn't require the absence of conflict. It requires the presence of commitment. You can disagree with someone, you can find them infuriating, and still choose to share the garden with them, because the alternative is isolation, and isolation is the death of pleasure. Epicurus was explicit about this. He said that of all the means to happiness that wisdom provides, by far the greatest is friendship. Not romantic love, not family obligation, not community duty. Friendship. The freely chosen bond between equals who enjoy each other's company. And that's the park. That's the heart of regular show. Every character is there by choice. They stay by choice. They fight for the garden by choice. And that choice, renewed every day, every episode, every season, is what makes it real. I want to talk about one specific aspect of the Epicurean garden that I think regular show nails, and it's the concept of autarkeia, self-sufficiency. Epicurus didn't mean self-sufficiency in the survivalist sense. He meant that the garden should be self-contained. It should generate its own meaning, its own pleasures, its own reasons for existing. It shouldn't depend on external validation. It shouldn't need the approval of the wider world. The park does this. The park is its own world. The characters have relationships outside the park. Margaret, Eileen, Starla, CJ. But the park is always the center of gravity. It's where they return. It's where things make sense. And the show's central conflict, in many ways, is between the park's self-sufficiency and the external world's demands. Mr. Maillard wants results. The city wants a functioning park. Society wants productive citizens. And the park says, we're fine. We're happy. Leave us alone. That's radical. That's a cartoon on Cartoon Network saying that maybe the grind isn't worth it. Maybe the hustle isn't necessary. Maybe you can build a meaningful life in a garden with your friends, doing simple work and enjoying simple pleasures, and that's enough. That's a good life. That's the life. There's a personal tangent I want to go on here, and I hope you'll indulge me. I watched regular show in college. I was 20, 21, living in a house with 4 other people, and we were all kind of lost. None of us had our lives figured out. We were eating ramen and playing video games and having arguments about nothing. And we watched regular show every week, and it felt like permission. Permission to not have it figured out yet. Permission to be in the garden, to enjoy the simple pleasures, to not have a plan. I didn't know it at the time, but what I was watching was a defense of a way of life. A way of life that the world tells you is wrong. That you should be hustling, grinding, optimizing, building your personal brand, crushing it. And regular show said, what if you just hung out with your friends and played punchies and maybe, eventually, figured out who you are at your own pace? What if that's enough? Epicurus would have loved this show. I'm sure of it. And I think there's one more Epicurean concept I want to bring in before we move on, because it connects to something I've been feeling throughout this whole analysis. Epicurus had a famous argument about death. He said, where death is, I am not. Where I am, death is not. Therefore, death is nothing to me. It's one of the oldest and most elegant arguments against the fear of death. You can't experience your own death, because experience requires consciousness, and death is the end of consciousness. Therefore, death is not a bad experience. It's not an experience at all. And regular show, for all its engagement with death, for all its death as a character episodes, and cosmic destruction, and Pops' sacrifice, ultimately lands on something close to Epicurus' position. The characters don't fear death. They don't obsess over it. They encounter it. They deal with it, and they go on living. Death is present in the show the way gravity is present, as a background condition, a fundamental feature of the world, something that shapes everything but doesn't dominate conscious thought. And in the finale, when Pops dies, the show doesn't linger in grief. It moves to the flash forward. It shows us life continuing. Kids being born, jobs being worked, pizza being eaten. The message isn't that death doesn't matter. The message is that life is what you do on the other side of death's shadow. You honor the dead by living fully. You honor Pops by becoming who he always believed you could be. That's Epicurean. That's Stoic. That's Buddhist. That's just true. But of course, the garden can't last forever. And that brings us to what I think is the deepest philosophical current running through the entire 8-season run of regular show. Something that the show addresses, not through dialogue or plot, but through its very structure, its very DNA. I'm talking about time, about growing up, about what Martin Heidegger called being toward death. Heidegger is a lot. He's dense and difficult, and his personal history is deeply problematic, and I don't want to get into that tonight. But his philosophy, specifically his ideas about Dasein, about what it means to be a human being existing in time, is, I think, the key to understanding what regular show is really about. Dasein is Heidegger's term for human existence. It literally means being there in German. And what makes Dasein different from the existence of a rock or a tree or a toaster is that Dasein knows it's going to end. Dasein is aware of its own mortality. And this awareness, this being toward death, is what structures everything. It's what makes choices matter. It's what makes time matter. It's what makes the present moment precious, and the future terrifying, and the past either a source of comfort or regret. Heidegger distinguished between authentic and inauthentic existence. Inauthentic existence is when you avoid thinking about death. When you lose yourself in the everyday, in the routines, the distractions, the they-self of going along with what everyone else is doing. You tell yourself, people die, but not me, not yet, not really. You push death to the periphery. You live as if you have infinite time. Authentic existence is when you face death directly. When you accept that you are finite, that your time is limited, that every choice you make costs you other possibilities. And paradoxically, this confrontation with death doesn't make you morbid or paralyzed. It makes you free. Because once you accept that you're going to die, the social pressures, the expectations, the you should and you must of everyday life lose their power over you. You become, in Heidegger's phrase, individualized, truly yourself, choosing your own path based on your own understanding of what matters. Regular show is a show about being toward death. It just disguises it really, really well. And I want to explain what I mean by that more carefully, because Heidegger is famously difficult, and I don't want to lose anyone at 2 a.m. Look, when Heidegger says being toward death, he doesn't just mean we're all going to die and that's scary. He means something more specific, and I think more beautiful. He means that death is not an event that happens at the end of your life. Death is a possibility that structures every moment of your life. You are always dying, in the sense that your finitude is always present, always coloring your experience, always making this moment matter, because there are only so many moments left. And the thing about regular show, the thing that took me years to notice, is that it has a hidden clock. A clock that starts ticking silently in season 1 and gets louder and louder as the series progresses. In the early seasons, you don't hear it. The episodes feel timeless, eternal, like they could go on forever. Mordecai and Rigby will always be 23. They'll always live in the park house. They'll always be goofing off while Benson screams at them. Nothing changes. Nothing needs to change. Time isn't real, but time is real, and the show knows it. Even in the early seasons, there are hints. The seasons change. Characters reference previous events. There's continuity, and that continuity creates history, and history creates the passage of time, and the passage of time creates loss. Think about the overall arc of the series. In seasons 1 through 3, time doesn't really move. The characters are stuck in a kind of pleasant stasis. Every episode resets. Nothing permanently changes. Mordecai and Rigby are perpetual slackers, perpetual 23-year-olds, perpetually avoiding the passage of time. But starting around season 4, time starts to creep in. Margaret goes to college. Mordecai has to confront the fact that things change, that people leave, that the comfortable present isn't permanent. By season 5, we're getting Skip's backstory, the weight of too much time, of immortality as burden rather than gift. By season 6, Muscle Man is getting married, and there's this palpable sense that the characters are growing up, that the garden is starting to change. And then season 7 arrives, and the show does something remarkable. Rigby goes back to high school to get his GED. Let me sit with that for a second. Rigby, the character who was defined for 6 seasons by his refusal to grow up. The character who dropped out of high school, who sabotaged his best friend's college admission because he couldn't face being left behind, who embodied aesthetic existence, pure pleasure, pure immediacy, no plan, no commitment, no future. Rigby goes back to school, and the reason is Eileen. Specifically, the episode The Eileen Plan, where Rigby discovers that Eileen's life plan, the plan she had since she was a teenager, involved marrying someone brilliant. And Rigby, for the first time, feels the gap between who he is and who he wants to be. Not because society tells him to, not because Benson yells at him, because love asks him to, because he wants to be worthy of someone he cares about. He secretly enrolls in high school courses. He goes to class. He writes a paper. He does homework. And when Eileen finds out, when she tracks him down on a field trip because she's hurt that he keeps ditching her, she tells him she likes him for who he is. But she's also clearly moved that he cared enough to try, that he wanted to grow, that he chose to change. That is being toward death. Not the literal kind. Nobody's dying here. But the existential kind. The recognition that time is passing, that the carefree present is finite, that if you want to build something meaningful, you have to start now. Rigby's return to school is his confrontation with his own temporality. It's his authentic moment. And I want to sit with the Eileen connection for a moment longer, because I think it's crucial. The Eileen Plan is such a quietly devastating episode. Rigby discovers that Eileen, his girlfriend, the person he loves, had a plan for her life since she was a teenager. She wanted to marry someone brilliant. And Rigby, who dropped out of high school, who has no credentials, who spends his days playing video games and getting into supernatural scrapes, Rigby hears this, and something shifts inside him. He doesn't tell Eileen he's going back to school. He hides it. He enrolls in classes secretly. He does homework in private. He goes on field trips and pretends he's somewhere else. And when Eileen finally finds him, when she tracks him down because she's hurt that he keeps disappearing, she's not angry about the school. She's moved by it. She tells him she likes him for who he is. But the subtext is clear. She also likes that he wanted to be more. That tension between accepting who you are and wanting to become who you could be, that's the core of Heidegger's authentic existence. Authenticity isn't about staying the same. It's about owning your potential, even when your potential terrifies you. Rigby was terrified that he wasn't good enough for Eileen. And instead of either accepting that fear or running from it, he did something about it, quietly, privately, without expecting praise or credit. That's growth without spectacle. That's philosophy without a textbook. That's a raccoon going to night school because he loves a mole and he wants to deserve her. And it leads to Rigby's graduation day special, Season 7, Episode 36, the half-hour season finale, where Rigby not only graduates, but has to give a speech on live television for a show called Inspire America. Rigby, on live TV, giving an inspiring speech. The guy who couldn't be bothered to mow a lawn. And I need to talk about what this episode means in the context of the whole series, because I think it's one of the most important episodes regular show ever produced. Rigby's graduation isn't just a character beat. It's a structural turning point. For 6 seasons, regular show operated in what I've been calling the Epicurean garden, the timeless, comfortable space where nothing permanently changes. Rigby's graduation is the moment the garden opens its gates. The moment the characters step out into the wider world. The moment time becomes real. And the show makes this literal by launching the entire park into space immediately afterward. The garden doesn't just open. It gets uprooted entirely, flung into the cosmos, stripped of its earthly comforts, and forced to confront the infinite. Season 8 takes place in space, and that's not just a setting change. It's a philosophical statement. The characters can't hide in the garden anymore. They can't rely on the comfortable routines. They're in the void now, in the infinite, in Heidegger's nothingness, the confrontation with the absence of familiar meaning. And it's in this void that Pops' true nature is revealed. It's in space, away from the garden, away from the park, and the pizza, and the video games, that the characters learn about Megacranus and Antipops and the cosmic cycle. The comfort had to be stripped away for the truth to emerge. Heidegger would say, the characters had to experience anxiety, the groundlessness of being without familiar supports, before they could confront their authentic selves. And the episode ends with a cliffhanger, setting up the final season in space. But the emotional climax isn't the sci-fi spectacle. It's Rigby, in a cap and gown, having crossed a threshold he spent 6 seasons avoiding. That's authentic existence. That's Dasein facing its finitude, and choosing to build something rather than continue drifting. Mordecai's arc is the same thing, but slower and more painful. Mordecai spent his entire time on the show running from his authentic self. He dropped out of art school. He avoided his feelings for Margaret. He botched things with CJ. He kept making choices that were safe, that were inauthentic, that avoided the risk of truly committing to anything. And then, in the finale's flash forward, we see what happens when Mordecai finally embraces authentic existence. He quits the park. He moves to New York City. He goes back to making art. The thing he was always meant to do. The thing he abandoned because he was scared. He opens a gallery show. And at that show, he meets a Batwoman. Not Margaret, not CJ, someone entirely new, and falls in love. They get married. They have kids. I know a lot of fans were upset that Mordecai didn't end up with Margaret or CJ. I get it. 6 seasons of romantic buildup, and he ends up with a character we've never even met. But I think that's the point. I think the show is saying, the person you're supposed to be with might not be anyone you've met yet. The life you're supposed to live might not be anything you've imagined yet. Authentic existence isn't about fulfilling the narrative you've been building. It's about being open to the future, even when it doesn't look like what you expected. Heidegger would call this authentic temporality, living toward your possibilities, pulled forward by projects you've genuinely chosen, rather than stuck in the past or lost in the present. Mordecai's future isn't defined by Margaret or CJ or even the park. It's defined by art, by creation, by becoming the person he was always running from becoming. And I want to talk about the fact that Mordecai becomes a visual artist. Not a musician, not a writer, not a filmmaker, but a painter. Because J.G. Quintel went to CalArts. Quintel is a visual artist. Mordecai's character was always a loose autobiography. The guy from art school who ended up in a weird job surrounded by weird people, trying to figure out his life. And the fact that Mordecai eventually returns to art feels like Quintel giving his own younger self permission. Permission to believe that the art matters. That the time spent away from art wasn't wasted. That the detour through the park, through the mundane jobs, and the friendships and the absurd adventures, was actually the thing that gave the art its substance. Because what does Mordecai paint? He paints his experiences at the park. He turns the mess and chaos and love and loss of his time as a groundskeeper into visual art. The garden becomes the canvas. The wasted years become the material. And I think that's true for a lot of artists. That the time you think you're wasting is actually the time you're collecting the experiences that will fuel the work that defines you. You just don't know it while it's happening. You only see it from the view from above, from the 25-year retrospective, from the flash forward at the end. Quintel collected his CalArts experiences and turned them into regular show. Mordecai collected his park experiences and turned them into paintings. The pattern is the same. Life becomes art, becomes meaning. The raw material of existence. The friendships, the heartbreaks, the absurd catastrophes, the quiet Tuesday afternoons, gets transmuted into something that endures. That's Heidegger's poiesis, the Greek concept of bringing forth that Heidegger loved. The idea that art is a form of revealing, of uncovering truth through creation. Mordecai's paintings aren't just representations of his past. They're revelations of the meaning that was always there, hidden inside the mundane, waiting to be brought forth. And here's a callback to Sartre that I think ties this all together. Mordecai's entire arc is a progression from bad faith to authenticity, From pretending he doesn't have choices to finally making real ones. From being the guy who can't confess his feelings to being the guy who moves to New York and builds a life from scratch. Existence precedes essence. Mordecai exists for 7 seasons before he finally starts building his essence. And when he does, it's beautiful. All right, let me take you on a slight detour now, because there's an aspect of regular show that I find philosophically rich in a way that doesn't get talked about enough. And it's not a character or a theme, it's an aesthetic choice. The show's obsession with the 1980s. J.G. Quintel has been open about this. He grew up in the 80s. He loved the music, the technology, the culture, and he wove that love into every fiber of regular show. The show is absolutely drenched in 80s nostalgia. Cassette tapes, VHS players, arcade cabinets, synth-heavy music, montage sequences that look like they were pulled from a John Hughes movie. The entire soundtrack feels like someone left a boombox playing in 1987, and it's still going. In Prank Callers, Season 1, Episode 9, Mordecai and Rigby are literally transported back to 1982 after trying to prank call the master prank caller. They end up stuck in the actual 1980s. The episode uses the decade as both a setting and a punchline, but there's something deeper happening. And in Mordecai and the Rigbys, a Season 1 episode, the duo forms a band and performs an original song called Party Tonight at an open mic night. The song, the performance, the aesthetic of the episode, it's all 80s. Lasers, flying doves, synth rock. It's not just a reference. It's a recreation, an attempt to live inside a particular cultural moment. And then there are the Format Wars episodes. The Last Laserdisc Player in Season 4, where VHS and Laserdisc are personified as characters fighting for relevance, and Format Wars 2 in Season 6, where DVD and internet streaming enter the conflict. These episodes are literally about the death of physical media, the death of the very objects that carry 80s culture. VHS tapes, Laserdiscs. These things are dying, and the show mourns them, while also kind of laughing at them. Now, I want to read all of this through the lens of Jean Baudrillard, specifically through his concept of simulacra and simulation. Baudrillard, writing in 1981, the same year MTV launched, which is not a coincidence in this analysis, argued that we live in a world where the distinction between reality and representation has collapsed. We don't interact with the real anymore. We interact with simulations of the real, copies without originals, signs that refer to nothing but other signs. And one of the key mechanisms of this collapse is nostalgia. Baudrillard argued that when the real disappears, nostalgia fills the void. We become desperate for authenticity, for genuine experience, and so we latch onto the past. But the past we latch onto isn't the actual past. It's a simulation of the past, a curated, sanitized, aestheticized version of what the 80s were actually like. Regular show's 80s nostalgia operates on multiple levels simultaneously, and I think this is genuinely brilliant, even if it wasn't entirely intentional. On one level, the show is simply expressing Quintel's genuine affection for the decade he grew up in. Quintel loved the 80s so much that he wanted to record the show's original music on cassettes and throw them into the crowd at San Diego Comic-Con. That's real affection. That's authentic nostalgia. A person remembering something they genuinely experienced and loved. But on another level, the show's audience, kids and young adults watching on Cartoon Network in the 2000s, had no first-hand experience of the 80s. For them, the VHS tapes and cassette players and synth rock were already simulacra, already copies without originals. They weren't remembering the 80s. They were experiencing a simulation of the 80s, filtered through a cartoon that was itself filtered through one man's memories. And here's where it gets really interesting. The Format Wars episodes make this explicit. In those episodes, physical media formats are literally at war with each other for survival. VHS fights, Laserdisc fights, DVD fights streaming. And the show sides with the obsolete formats. It sides with VHS and Laserdisc. It mourns them. It treats their death as a genuine loss. But what's being mourned isn't the technology itself. Nobody actually wants to go back to rewinding VHS tapes. What's being mourned is the realness that those objects represented, the physicality of them. The fact that you could hold a VHS tape in your hand and it was a real thing with weight and texture, not a stream of data in a cloud somewhere. The format wars are, in Baudrillard's terms, a mourning for the real in an age of simulation. And Regular Show, a show that exists as a digital animation broadcast over cable networks and later streamed on platforms, is itself part of the simulation it mourns. It's a show about the death of the real that can only exist in the age of the simulated. That's a level of philosophical irony that I don't think gets enough credit. There's also something to be said about how the show uses these 80s aesthetics in its escalation sequences. When things get crazy in Regular Show, when the mundane task spirals into cosmic chaos, the show often shifts into an 80s action movie register. Synth music kicks in. The visuals become more dynamic, more colorful, more over the top. It's as if the show is saying, the only way to process the absurdity of modern existence is to filter it through the aesthetics of the past. We don't have our own visual language for cosmic chaos, so we borrow the 80s. Baudrillard would say this is the procession of simulacra, the model preceding and replacing the real. The 80s action movie aesthetic becomes more real than reality itself. It's the reference that creates meaning, not the thing being referenced. And I think this connects to something broader about the show's relationship with its audience. Regular Show was made by a man nostalgic for his childhood. It was watched by people who had never experienced that childhood. And it created, in the space between those two positions, a shared mythology, a set of images and sounds and feelings that belonged to neither the past nor the present, but existed in a Baudrillardian hyperreality of their own. The show didn't represent the 80s. It simulated them. And that simulation became, for a generation of viewers, more real than the actual decade ever was. I don't know if Quintel intended any of this. I kind of doubt it, but that's the thing about art. It's smarter than its creators. It contains more than anyone puts into it. And can I go on one more tangent about the nostalgia thing? Because it connects to something personal. I grew up in a time where we were already nostalgic for things we'd never experienced. I was nostalgic for the 80s before I was born. I was nostalgic for vinyl records before I'd ever touched a turntable. And I think a lot of people my age feel this. This weird, borrowed nostalgia. This longing for a realness we never actually had. And I think Regular Show understood this better than any other show of its era. Because it wasn't just nostalgic for the 80s. It was nostalgic for the experience of nostalgia itself. It was nostalgic for a time when you could be nostalgic for real things. When there was a genuine past to long for, rather than an endless hall of mirrors reflecting simulations of simulations. Baudrillard called this the desert of the real. The landscape you find when you strip away all the simulations and look for the actual, solid, genuine reality underneath. And what you find is nothing. Or at least something much thinner and less satisfying than the simulation promised. The actual 80s were just the 80s. They had bad hair and Reagan and the Cold War and acid rain. The simulated 80s, the Regular Show 80s, the synthwave 80s, the vaporwave 80s, those are the ones we love. Those are the ones that feel real, even though they never existed. Regular Show lives in this gap, between the real and the simulated, between actual experience and mediated memory. And I think its brilliance is that it doesn't try to resolve the gap. It doesn't pretend to offer genuine 80s experience. It just plays in the space between, delighting in the aesthetics while acknowledging, through episodes like the Format Wars saga, that the physical reality underlying those aesthetics is dying or already dead. There's a sadness to this that the show doesn't shy away from. The Format Wars episodes are comedic, sure, but there's a genuine melancholy underneath the jokes about obsolete technology, because the characters care about these objects, the VHS tapes, the laser discs, the cassettes. They care about them the way you care about a childhood home that's been demolished, not because the physical structure mattered, but because it was the vessel that held the memories. And when the vessel is destroyed, the memories become unanchored. They float, they fade, they become simulations of themselves. That's what Baudrillard meant by the third order of simulacra, the stage where the copy no longer even pretends to reference an original. It's just a sign pointing at nothing. And regular show, in its quieter moments, mourns the arrival of this stage. It mourns the death of the real while creating some of the most vivid simulations on television. And it trusts the audience to hold both truths at once, that the simulation is beautiful, and that the beauty is itself a kind of loss. Okay, I want to take us somewhere different now. Somewhere that regular show goes surprisingly often. For a show about park groundskeepers. I want to talk about death. Not metaphorical death. Not the death of authenticity. Or the death of the real. Actual death. Characters dying. Characters grieving. The show's sustained, surprisingly mature engagement with mortality. Death shows up as a character in regular show. Literally. He first appears in Over the Top, a Season 2 episode where Skips accidentally kills Rigby during an arm wrestling match, and Death arrives to collect his soul. Death in this show has a British accent, one average-sized arm, and one massive muscular arm, and he's voiced by Julian Holloway. He's not a villain, exactly. He's more like a cosmic bureaucrat. He has rules. He makes deals. He can be bargained with. And the fact that Death is a recurring character, that he shows up again in Dead at 8, Season 3, Episode 27, where Mordecai and Rigby have to babysit Death's son Thomas to save Muscle Man's life, and in multiple other episodes, normalizes death in a way that I think is genuinely philosophical. The Stoics, and I'm thinking specifically of Marcus Aurelius and Seneca here, had this concept of memento mori. Remember that you will die, not as a threat, not as a source of despair, but as a practice. A daily reminder that life is finite, that every moment matters, that clinging to things you can't keep is the source of suffering. Regular show practices. Memento mori every time death shows up. He's there to remind the characters and the audience that the game has stakes, that people die, that the fun and games and slacking off all take place within a finite window that will, eventually, close. And the show takes death seriously, even when death himself isn't present. Muscle Man's father dies. That's a real death with real grief. Skip's girlfriend died centuries ago, and he's still mourning. Pops dies at the end of the series. These aren't fake-outs or temporary inconveniences. They're permanent losses that the characters have to carry. There's a Buddhist concept I want to bring in here, the idea of impermanence. In Buddhist philosophy, suffering arises from attachment. We cling to things, to people, to experiences, to states of being, and when they inevitably change or end, we suffer. The path to peace isn't to avoid caring. It's to care deeply while also accepting that nothing lasts. Regular show embodies this tension beautifully. The characters care deeply. They fight to save each other. They form bonds that are genuine and powerful. But the show also keeps reminding them, and us, that these bonds are temporary. Pops will die. The park crew will scatter. Everyone will eventually go their separate ways. And the question the show keeps asking, implicitly, is, does the fact that it ends make it less beautiful or more? I think the show answers, more. Always more. And here's where I want to bring in a concept from Zen Buddhism that I think applies perfectly. There's this idea of mono no aware. It's actually Japanese, and it translates roughly to the pathos of things, or the bittersweet awareness of impermanence. It's the feeling you get when you see cherry blossoms falling. They're beautiful because they're falling. If they lasted forever, they'd just be pink trees. It's the transience that creates the beauty. Regular show is saturated with mono no aware. Every escalation, every absurd adventure, every moment of friendship, they're all falling cherry blossoms. They're beautiful because they won't last. The show is always moving forward, always consuming its own moments, always leaving episodes behind. And the characters can never go back. They can never re-experience the baby ducks for the first time, or the terror of the first Terror Tales special, or the thrill of the first time they defeated a supernatural threat together. And the audience can't go back either, which is part of why rewatching regular show hits different than watching it the first time. The first time, you're in the moment. The second time, you know where it's going. You know Pops will die. You know the park will go to space. You know Mordecai and Rigby will grow up and apart and then back together again. And that knowledge, that being toward death awareness, makes every silly moment more precious. Every my mom joke. Every good show. Every time Benson turns red and screams. Because you know, the second time around, that all of this is finite. All of this will end. And I think that's actually the deepest philosophical experience regular show offers. Not the analysis of specific episodes through specific frameworks, but the simple, powerful, unavoidable feeling of watching something you love end. Of knowing that the garden was temporary. Of accepting, with gratitude and grief in equal measure, that the cherry blossoms fell. There's a moment in Cheer Up Pops, the penultimate episode, remember, where the crew records their memories before the final battle, that I think is the purest expression of this idea. They know the end is coming. Pops is going to fight anti-Pops. The universe might end. Everything might be erased. And their response isn't to panic or despair. Their response is to sit together, watch their memories, laugh at the good times, and be grateful for what they had. That is acceptance. That is impermanence, embraced rather than feared. That is the Stoic memento mori and the Buddhist teaching of non-attachment fused together in an 11-minute cartoon about friends watching home movies. And it's also, I think, a meta-statement about the show itself. Cheer Up Pops aired as part of the finale block on January 16th, 2017. The show was ending. The audience knew it was ending. And the characters, in the fiction, were also facing an ending. So the act of recording memories, of preserving the show's history in-universe, mirrors the audience's act of rewatching episodes, of making tribute videos, of holding onto a show that was about to be over. Regular show knew it was going to end, and it used its final episodes to model how to handle endings. Not with denial, not with anger, with gratitude and with love, and with the acceptance that even beautiful things end. I think the Stoics would approve. Seneca wrote that we should practice the premeditation of death, not to become morbid, but to become present, to stop taking things for granted, to wake up each morning aware that this could be the last day, and to live accordingly. Regular show spent 8 seasons doing exactly that. Every episode, the stakes escalated to life and death levels. Every episode, someone was in danger. Every episode, the characters had to fight for their lives, for their home, for each other. And then they'd wake up the next morning and do it again, aware, on some level, that it wouldn't last forever, and choosing to enjoy it anyway. Let me bring something else in here, because I've been talking about individual philosophical frameworks, but I want to talk about something that spans the entire show, something that connects every character and every theme into one unified idea, something that I've been circling around all night without naming directly. And maybe this is the most important thing I'll say in this entire video. So if you've been drifting off, which honestly is fine, that's kind of the point of this channel, maybe come back for this part. Regular show is about the fear of becoming who you're supposed to become. Not the fear of failure, not the fear of the unknown, the fear of becoming. The fear that you might actually succeed, that you might actually grow up, that you might actually have to leave the garden and step into the world as a complete, responsible, authentic human being. Because if you do that, if you commit to a career, a relationship, a life, then the game is real. The choices count. The stakes are permanent. You can't reset. You can't go back to playing video games on the couch and pretending tomorrow doesn't exist. That's terrifying. That's the most terrifying thing in the world. And I think every single person listening to this has felt it. The moment when the future stops being abstract and becomes immediate. The moment when you realize that the choices you've been avoiding aren't going to wait for you anymore. Think about it. Every main character is, in some way, running from their destiny. Mordecai is supposed to be an artist. He dropped out of art school and hid at the park. Rigby is supposed to grow up. He dropped out of high school and hid at the park. Benson is supposed to be a musician. He got fired from his band and hid at the park. Skips is supposed to be eternal. He hides the pain of that behind competence and routine. Pops is supposed to be the savior of the universe. He hides behind childlike innocence and good show. Muscle Man is supposed to be emotionally honest. He hides behind my mom jokes and bravado. The park is where they all hide. It's the Garden of Epicurus, yes, but it's also a refuge, a place where you can avoid the future, where you can stay in the eternal present of mowing lawns and playing video games and ordering pizza and never ever having to confront who you might become if you stopped hiding. And here's the tension that drives the entire series. The park is both the solution and the problem. It's the thing that gives the characters comfort and the thing that keeps them from growing. It's the cocoon and the trap. And the show loves the park. You can feel Quintel's love for this space in every frame, in the way the background artists render the grass and the trees and the house, in the way the music shifts when the characters are home and safe. But the show also knows, even in season 1, that the park can't last forever, that hiding has an expiration date, that the cocoon has to open eventually, or the butterfly dies inside it. That's why the show's structure shifts so dramatically over its run. In the early seasons, the park is everything. Episodes begin and end there. The world outside barely exists. But as the seasons progress, the world intrudes. Margaret goes to college. The outside world takes her away. Muscle Man gets married. The outside world pulls him toward new commitments. Rigby goes back to school. The outside world demands he grow. And finally, in season 8, the park itself leaves the earth. The cocoon opens. The characters tumble into the void. And the void is where they become. And the show, all 8 seasons of it, is about the slow, gradual, sometimes painful process of these characters stopping hiding and starting becoming. That's Heidegger's authentic existence. That's Dasein confronting being toward death. That's Sartre's movement from bad faith to authenticity. That's Kierkegaard's leap of faith. It's all the same thing, expressed through different philosophers' vocabularies. The terrifying, liberating act of becoming who you are. And here's where I think Regular Show achieves something really remarkable as a philosophical text. It doesn't present this process as triumphant or glorious. It presents it as messy, painful, slow, full of setbacks. Mordecai doesn't have a eureka moment where he suddenly decides to be an artist. He fumbles for 7 seasons, and then, in the gap between the final battle and the flash forward, somehow finds his way. Rigby doesn't decide overnight to go back to school. He hides it from everyone, embarrassed, uncertain. Benson doesn't triumphantly return to drumming. He stays at the park, but he finds peace with that choice. Growth in Regular Show looks like real growth. Incremental, non-linear, sometimes invisible from the outside. And I think that's more honest than any grand narrative of transformation. The show says, you don't need a dramatic moment to change. You just need time. And friends. And maybe a few brushes with cosmic annihilation to put things in perspective. Let me give you one more example of this kind of quiet, authentic growth, because I think it illuminates the Heideggerian framework beautifully. Rigby's relationship with his brother Don. In Dawn, Season 1, Episode 10, Rigby's younger brother visits the park to help with an audit, and he's everything Rigby isn't. Tall, charming, competent, liked by everyone. Even Mordecai likes Dawn more than he likes Rigby, or at least that's how Rigby perceives it. And Rigby is consumed by jealousy. He resents Dawn. He resents that Dawn is taller than him, even though he's the younger brother. He resents that at his 6th birthday party, all his friends paid more attention to Dawn than to him. He resents that the world seems to have decided that Dawn is the better version of what a Sorenstein can be. But here's the twist, and it's so good and so quietly devastating. Dawn apologizes to Rigby. He tells Rigby that he looks up to him, that he gets his haircut like Rigby's because he wants to look like his older brother, that he doesn't wear clothes because Rigby doesn't. Dawn has been trying to be like Rigby his entire life, and Rigby never knew, because Rigby was so lost in his own insecurity that he couldn't see the admiration right in front of him. That's Heidegger's they-self, the inauthentic mode of existence where you define yourself through comparison to others, through the social hierarchy, through the endless game of who's better, who's worse, where do I rank. Rigby's jealousy of Dawn isn't about Dawn at all. It's about Rigby's inability to see himself clearly. He's so busy measuring himself against his brother that he can't recognize his own worth or the love that his brother has for him. And the resolution, the sugar, the manly hug between brothers, is a moment of authentic self-recognition. Rigby sees himself through Dawn's eyes and realizes, oh, I'm not the lesser version. I'm just the different version. And different is fine. Different is enough. That's Dasein individuating. That's the movement from the they-self to the authentic self. And it happens in 11 minutes, in a cartoon, between a raccoon and his taller brother, with a hug. Here's the thing about Heidegger that I keep coming back to, and I want to make sure I say it clearly before we move on. Heidegger argued that most of us, most of the time, live in what he called falling, fallenness. Not falling in a moral sense, not fallen as in sinful, but fallen as in lost. Lost in the everyday, lost in the routines and the distractions and the noise of the they, the anonymous social world that tells us what to care about, what to want, how to behave. And Regular Show's early seasons are a portrait of fallenness. The characters are lost in the everyday. They're consumed by trivial concerns, video games, coffee, arm wrestling competitions, who gets the best chair, and the supernatural escalations, for all their cosmic spectacle, are just amplified versions of everyday distraction. They're still running from themselves. They're still avoiding the question that Heidegger insists we all face eventually. What is my own, personal, non-transferable relationship to my own existence? The show's genius is that it lets the characters stay fallen for 6 seasons. It doesn't rush them toward authenticity. It lets them be lost, lets them be distracted, lets them be inauthentic. Because that's how life works. You don't wake up one day and decide to be authentic. You live inauthentically for years, maybe decades, and then something happens. A death, a graduation, a betrayal, a launch into space, and the fallenness cracks and you glimpse, for just a moment, the authentic self underneath. And then the really hard part begins. Because authenticity isn't a destination. It's a practice. It's something you have to choose every day against the constant gravitational pull of the everyday. The characters don't arrive at authenticity in the finale and stay there. They arrive at authenticity in the finale and then have to keep choosing it for 25 years in the ordinary, non-supernatural world of careers and marriages and parenthood. And that's harder than fighting anti-pops. That's harder than any cosmic battle. Because there's no dramatic soundtrack, no escalation, no baby ducks forming a Voltron. Just Tuesday. And the choice to be yourself on Tuesday. Every Tuesday. Forever. I want to circle back to something I mentioned at the very beginning of this video. I said that Regular Show, created by a guy who doodled a raccoon on the side of his desk at CalArts, accidentally stumbled into one of the most complete philosophical texts about what it means to be alive. And I've been building the case for that thesis for a while now. So let me bring it together. J.G. Quintel created Regular Show when he was working on The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack for Cartoon Network as a creative director. Cartoon Network launched a shorts program called the Cartoonstitute, and Quintel pitched his idea. He took the characters from his student films, the characters that came from midnight sessions at CalArts, where students would draw title names out of a hat and make a film in 48 hours, and he built a world around them. And that world, I think, is one of the most philosophically complete fictional universes ever created. Not because Quintel sat down and read Sartre and Camus and Nietzsche and deliberately encoded their ideas into a cartoon. I don't think he did that. I think what happened is something more interesting. I think Quintel was trying to tell the truth about his own experience, about being in his 20s, about working dead-end jobs, about the gap between who you are and who you thought you'd be, about friendship and loss and nostalgia, and the terrifying passage of time. And in telling that truth, he accidentally recreated philosophical frameworks that took history's greatest thinkers decades to develop. Because philosophy isn't something you find in books, it's something you find in life. And Regular Show is about life. Specifically, it's about the kind of life that most people actually live. Not the dramatic, world historical life of kings and conquerors, but the quiet, mundane, sometimes absurd life of people who work at a park and eat pizza and play video games and try to figure out what they're doing. Sartre found existentialism in the cafes of Paris. Camus found absurdism in the streets of Algiers. Nietzsche found the will to power on long walks through the Swiss Alps. And Quintel found all of it, or something equivalent to all of it, at a park, in a cartoon, about a blue jay and a raccoon. I think there's a meta moment happening right now in this video, and I'm aware of the irony of this. Me talking about a cartoon as if it's a philosophical treatise, layering frameworks onto something that was primarily designed to make kids laugh. And maybe that's presumptuous. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe the curtains are just blue. But I don't think so. And here's why. Because the show's emotional beats land. They land not just as good storytelling, although they are that, but as lived philosophy. When Pops flies into the sun, you feel the weight of sacrifice. When Skips keeps skipping, you feel the weight of grief. When Rigby walks across the graduation stage, you feel the weight of growth. These feelings aren't accidental. They're the feelings that philosophy tries to articulate. The show doesn't use the words. It doesn't say Dasein or absurdism or ressentiment, but it creates the experiences those words describe. And that, I think, is the highest form of philosophy. Not the kind you read in a textbook. The kind you feel in your chest at 1 a.m. while watching a cartoon you grew up with. Let me take you back to the finale one more time, because I think the ending of Regular Show is one of the most philosophically rich endings in television history, and I want to do it justice. A regular epic final battle. 3 parts. The entire park crew, plus allies gathered across 8 seasons, fighting to save the universe from anti-Pops. Pops, the embodiment of pure good, facing his twin brother, the embodiment of pure evil, in a battle that has ended in stalemate 20 times before. And Pops breaks the cycle, not through strength, not through strategy, through love. He hugs his brother and flies into the sun. After the sacrifice, something incredible happens. The show's timeline resets to the very first episode, to The Power. The same scene, the same moment. Mordecai and Rigby, wrestling over beef burrito. The hole in the wall, the magical keyboard. For one terrifying moment, you think the show is saying that nothing mattered, that it all resets, that the boulder rolls back down the hill. But then Rigby remembers. He digs up the Blu-ray discs from Cheer Up Pops, the memories the crew recorded before the final battle. He shows them to Mordecai, and Mordecai remembers too. Everything that happened, every episode, every friendship, every loss, every moment of growth and absurdity and love. The memories break the cycle. The fact that they recorded their experiences, the fact that they chose to preserve what they had, is what prevents the universe from fully resetting. The simulation almost wins. The Baudrillardian nightmare almost happens. Everything reduced to a copy, a loop, a simulation of what came before. But memory saves them. Real, lived, specific memory. Not abstract, not philosophical. Just, I was there. We were friends. This happened. That's the show's final philosophical statement. And I think it encompasses everything we've talked about tonight. So let me bring it together. Let me trace each thread we've been following and show you how they all converge in those final minutes. Sartre. Existence precedes essence, and the memories prove it. These characters existed first, as slackers, as lost 20-somethings, as people without a plan or a purpose. And through their choices, through 7 years of episodes, they built their essences. Mordecai chose art. Rigby chose growth. Benson chose to stay. Muscle Man chose love. Their essences weren't predetermined. They were constructed, one episode at a time, one choice at a time. And the Blu-ray discs, the recorded memories, are the proof. The tangible evidence that existence came first and meaning followed. Camus. The absurd cycle can be broken. Sisyphus can, actually, stop pushing the boulder, but only by accepting it fully, by embracing the absurdity rather than fighting it. Pop's sacrifice is the ultimate acceptance. He doesn't try to defeat the cycle on its own terms. He doesn't fight harder or push the boulder faster. He steps off the hill entirely. He lets go. And in letting go, he breaks what 20 cycles of fighting could not. Camus said one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Regular Show says one must imagine Sisyphus choosing to stop. Not out of despair, but out of love. Nietzsche, amor fati, love your fate. Even the painful parts. Even the parts that seem meaningless. Because they brought you here. To this moment, to these people. The flash forward shows us characters who have accepted their fates. Not the fates they planned, not the fates they wanted, but the fates they got. Mordecai didn't plan to end up with someone he'd never met. Rigby didn't plan to be a family man. Benson didn't plan to spend his life at the park, but they love it. They love the lives they have, even though those lives are nothing like what they imagined. That's amor fati. That's the yes saying to life that Nietzsche spent his career trying to articulate. Kierkegaard. The leap of faith is real. Pops' sacrifice is the ultimate leap. A commitment to something beyond rational justification, beyond evidence, beyond any guarantee of success. He doesn't know it will work. He doesn't know that flying into the sun with his brother will break the cycle rather than just reset it again. He leaps, and the leap is enough. Heidegger. Authentic being toward death means facing your mortality and using it to become who you truly are. The characters face the literal end of the universe, the most extreme version of being toward death imaginable, and in the flash forward, they finally become themselves. 25 years of authentic existence, made possible by confronting the ultimate finitude. The proximity to death didn't destroy them. It freed them. Plato. The form of the good sacrifices itself, but its impressions remain. Pops is gone, but his goodness lingers in the people he loved. The shadows on the cave wall are all that remain of the sun, but the shadows still illuminate. The form is eternal, even when the vessel is destroyed. Pop's watching from heaven, watching his own show on VHS. That's the form gazing at its own reflections, delighted by them, at peace with the fact that reflections are enough. Epicurus. The garden scatters, but its pleasures endure. The friends move on, build separate lives, start families, change careers. But they come back. The finale shows them reuniting at the park, years later, for a ceremony to honor Pops. They return to the garden, not because they have to, because the garden shaped them. Because the simple pleasures, the pizza, the video games, the arguments, the crises, the afternoons doing nothing together, those pleasures became the foundation of who they are. And Baudrillard, the simulation almost wins. The reset almost erases everything. The universe almost collapses back to the power, back to the beginning, back to a copy without memory or meaning. But the real, preserved on physical media, on Blu-ray discs, in the stubborn materiality of recorded memory, the real survives. The memories break through the simulation. The specific, lived, unrepeatable experiences of these characters resist the cosmic control plus Z. And the show's final image, Pops watching a VHS tape in heaven, insists that the most real thing in the universe is a physical object containing recorded human experience. Not a stream, not a cloud, a tape. The flash forward is 25 years, roughly. And here's what we see. Mordecai becomes an artist in New York. He marries someone new. He has kids. He paints. He finally does the thing he spent 7 seasons avoiding. Rigby marries Eileen. They have kids. He has a job. He's responsible. He grew up. The high school dropout became a husband and a father and a functioning adult. Muscle Man and Starla have a daughter. The my mom guy became a dad. Benson keeps running the park. New employees. Same old Benson, but happy, content, at peace with who he is. High Five Ghost becomes a DJ, which is maybe the purest character resolution in the show. The guy whose identity was literally defined by one gesture, the high five, finds a career defined by making other people feel good. And Skips. Skips is still there, still at the park, still skipping, the immortal knight of faith, carrying his grief and his promise into an eternity that has, finally, been broken free of its cycle. The universe won't reset anymore. The people Skips loves won't be erased by cosmic stalemate. They'll just live, and age, and eventually die, the way people are supposed to. And Skips will carry their memories the way he carries Mona's. In every skip, in every step, forever. And the very last image of the show, and I know people who cried at this, and I don't blame them, and I'm not going to pretend I wasn't one of them, is Pops, in some kind of heaven or afterlife, watching a VHS tape labeled regular show. He's watching his friends. He's watching the memories. He's watching the life that his sacrifice made possible. And he's happy. He's smiling that Pop smile, the one that makes everything feel okay. And he says nothing. And the tape plays. And that's how it ends. Let me sit with this image, because I think it's one of the most loaded, philosophically dense images in television history. And it goes by in seconds. Pops is in heaven. Or whatever the show's version of heaven is. A warm, bright, peaceful space outside of time. He is the form of the good, returned to the realm of forms, existing in platonic perfection beyond the messy, imperfect physical world. And what is he doing? He's watching the physical world. He's watching the cave. He's watching the shadows on the wall, the flickering, imperfect, temporary lives of his friends as they play out on a screen. And he's not sad about being separated from them. He's not yearning to go back. He's at peace because he can see from the realm of forms that the shadows were beautiful, that the imperfect, temporary, messy lives of his friends were worth sacrificing for, that the cave, for all its limitations, contained real love and real friendship and real growth. Plato argued that the philosopher, having seen the forms, would find it painful to return to the cave, would find the shadows inadequate, would be frustrated by the limitations of the physical world. But Pops loves the shadows. He watches them with delight. He finds them sufficient. He finds them good. Good show, he would say. Jolly good show. And the medium he watches them on, a VHS tape, is itself a shadow. It's an imperfect recording on an obsolete format, grainy and degraded and finite. The tape will eventually wear out. The magnetic coating will fade. The images will blur and distort and eventually disappear. Even in heaven, impermanence is present. Even in the realm of eternal goodness, the medium is temporary. But that's okay, because the love was real. The friendship was real. The growth was real. And if the recording fades, if the tape wears out, if the VHS player breaks down and nobody can fix it, the reality that the tape captured still happened, still mattered, still changed the universe. A VHS tape, not a digital stream, not a Blu-ray, not an eternal, incorruptible file stored in the cloud forever. A VHS tape, the most obsolete, the most nostalgic, the most stubbornly physical of all media formats. In heaven, where the form of the good lives, the technology of choice is VHS. That's regular show's final joke. And it's also regular show's final philosophical statement. The real persists. The genuine survives. Not in the cloud, not in the simulation, not in the hyper-real, but in the scratchy, rewound, slightly fuzzy warmth of a VHS tape played one more time. And I think there's something about the VHS format specifically that matters here. VHS tapes degrade every time you play them. Every viewing wears the tape down a little. The act of watching destroys the thing you're watching, incrementally, molecule by molecule. The tape is literally being consumed by the act of love that is watching it. That's impermanence. That's the Buddhist teaching embodied in a piece of magnetic tape. The thing you love is destroyed by the act of loving it. And that doesn't make the love wrong. It makes the love sacred. Every viewing is a small sacrifice. Every rewind is an act of faith. A belief that the tape will play again. That the images will still be there. That one more time is worth the cost. Pops watches his VHS tape in heaven. And every second of viewing is a tiny death of the tape itself. And he watches anyway, because the watching is the point. The watching is the love. The watching is the final, ultimate, absolute refusal to let the simulation replace the real. Good show, good show, good show. So, where does that leave us? I started this video with a thesis that regular show is one of the most philosophically rich works of art in the last 20 years. And I've spent, a while now, building the case. Sartre in the slacking, Camus in the escalation, Nietzsche in the gumball machine, Kierkegaard in the immortal Yeti, Plato in the lollipop man, Hegel in the green guy who keeps saying, my mom, Epicurus in the park, Heidegger in the growing up, Baudrillard in the VHS tapes, Stoicism and Buddhism in the acceptance of death. And I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, wasn't this just a funny cartoon? Wasn't this just a show for kids? Didn't J.G. Quintel just want to make people laugh? Yeah, he did, and he succeeded. Regular show is hilarious. It's goofy and absurd and delightful, and it has episodes where a man-shaped blob of gumballs screams, "Get back to work!" at a raccoon who's playing punchies with a blue jay. It's not a philosophy lecture. It's not trying to be a philosophy lecture. But that's exactly why it works as philosophy. Because the best philosophy isn't the kind you study in a classroom. It's the kind that sneaks up on you while you're laughing. The kind that lodges in your chest without you realizing it. The kind that makes you think, years later, about a cartoon lollipop man flying into the sun and wonder why your eyes are wet. Camus didn't write The Myth of Sisyphus to be assigned in universities. He wrote it because he was trying to figure out how to live. Sartre didn't write Being and Nothingness to be dissected in seminars. He wrote it because freedom terrified him, and he needed to understand why. And Quintel didn't make regular show to illustrate philosophical frameworks. He made it because he was a guy in his 20s trying to make sense of the world, and what came out was something true. And truth, when you find it, resonates across traditions. It resonates whether you call it existentialism, or absurdism, or Dasein, or the Epicurean garden. The words don't matter. The feeling does. And regular show is full of feelings that philosophers have spent centuries trying to name. There's a concept in hermeneutics, the philosophy of interpretation, called the fusion of horizons. It was developed by Hans-Georg Gadamer, a student of Heidegger's. The idea is that when you encounter a text, a book, a painting, a show, you bring your own horizon of understanding, and the text has its own horizon. And genuine understanding happens when those horizons fuse. When your experience meets the text's meaning, and something new emerges that neither you nor the text could have produced alone. That's what we've been doing tonight. My horizon, my knowledge of philosophy, my personal experiences, my love for this show, has been fusing with regular show's horizon. And what's emerged isn't just an analysis. It's not just, here's how Sartre relates to Mordecai. It's something new. A way of seeing the show that enriches both the show and the philosophy. A way of understanding Camus that's deeper because I've watched Baby Duck's Form of Voltron. A way of watching regular show that's deeper because I've read Heidegger. That fusion of horizons, that's what art does at its best. It doesn't just transmit meaning. It creates the conditions for new meaning to emerge in the space between the art and the audience. And regular show, for all its apparent simplicity, creates those conditions as powerfully as any work of art I've encountered. So the next time someone tells you it's just a cartoon, just a kid's show, just 11 minutes of goofy animation, let them. They're not wrong. It is all of those things. It's also a meditation on freedom and absurdity and grief and time and love and death and the stubborn, beautiful insistence that life is worth living, even though, especially though, it doesn't make any sense. 244 episodes, 8 seasons, September 6th, 2010 to January 16th, 2017. Created by a man from Hanford, California, who drew a raccoon on the side of his desk at CalArts and reshaped animated television. Good show, Pops. Good show. And now, a few more thoughts. Because I'm not ready to let you go yet. Because there's something I've been circling around this entire video that I want to address directly. Why does this matter? Why does it matter that a Cartoon Network show can be read through philosophical lenses? Why does it matter that Mordecai is Sartre's authentic man, or that Benson is Nietzsche's last man? Who cares? Here's who cares. You care. Or you might, if you let yourself. Because the thing about philosophy, and I've been thinking about this a lot, not just tonight, but in general, in my life. The thing that gets lost in academia and textbooks and pretentious dinner party conversations is that philosophy is supposed to be about your life. Your actual, specific, messy life. Sartre didn't write about radical freedom so that professors could publish papers about it. He wrote about it because he was sitting in a cafe, drinking coffee, and realizing that every single thing he did was a choice. And that terrified him. Camus didn't write about the absurd because he enjoyed abstract reasoning. He wrote about it because the world was at war. People were dying. Nothing made sense. And he needed a reason to keep going. Philosophy is born from confusion, from pain, from the 3 a.m. feeling that nothing makes sense and you're not sure what you're doing with your life. From looking at the ceiling in the dark and thinking about choices you made and choices you didn't make, and whether any of it adds up to anything. Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. But I think the more relevant truth is that the examined life is terrifying. Because when you examine it, really look at it honestly, without the comfortable narratives and the easy excuses, what you find is freedom. And freedom, as Sartre told us, is a condemnation. You're free to choose, free to become, free to change everything about your life at any moment. And most of the time, that freedom is so overwhelming that you'd rather just order pizza and play video games and deal with it tomorrow. That's not a failure. That's not laziness. That's a completely rational response to the vertigo of existence. And Regular Show understood that. And that's exactly the feeling that Regular Show captures. That 20-something drift. That sense of working a job you don't really care about. Surrounded by people who are all kind of lost in their own ways. Filling the days with distractions, while somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice is asking, is this it? Is this what life is? If you've ever felt that, and I think most people have, at some point, then Regular Show isn't just entertainment. It's a companion. It's sitting next to you on the couch at 2 a.m. saying, yeah, I feel that too. And it's not going to get better anytime soon. But look, there's pizza, and your friend is here. And tomorrow, there's going to be some completely insane thing involving a sentient cassette tape, or a haunted video game, or baby ducks that know karate, and it'll be terrifying and hilarious, and it won't make any sense, and then it'll be over, and you'll still be here, and your friend will still be here, and that's enough. That's actually enough. I think about Epicurus in his garden. I think about him telling his friends, we don't need wealth. We don't need fame. We don't need the approval of the powerful or the applause of the masses. We need bread. We need water. We need each other. And from those simple pleasures, we can build a life worth living. And I think about the specific pleasures that Regular Show returns to, over and over, as touchstones of the good life. Pizza. The show is obsessed with pizza. Characters order pizza constantly. Pizza arrives during crises and celebrations alike. It's the show's communion bread, the shared food that binds the community together. And video games. Mordecai and Rigby's couch, with the TV and the game controllers, is the show's version of the campfire. It's where stories are shared, where bonds are renewed, where the day's absurd adventures are processed and metabolized. These aren't incidental details. They're the philosophical spine of the show. Epicurus didn't just say, enjoy simple pleasures, as a vague platitude. He meant it specifically. He meant, identify the pleasures that actually make you happy. Not the ones the world tells you should make you happy, but the ones that actually, viscerally, in your body and your heart, make you happy. And organize your life around them. For Epicurus, it was bread and water and conversation in the garden. For Mordecai and Rigby, it's pizza and video games and conversation at the park. Different pleasures, same philosophy. And I think the show has influenced how I think about my own life. I'm more protective of my simple pleasures now. I'm more aware of when I'm chasing complex, status-driven pleasures that don't actually make me happy versus the basic, uncomplicated pleasures that do. And I trace some of that awareness back to watching Regular Show and seeing over 8 seasons that the happiest moments aren't the spectacular ones. They're the couch moments, the pizza moments, the just hanging out with your friend moments. Regular Show is Epicurus's garden animated. And if you grew up watching it, if it was the show you put on when you couldn't sleep, if it was the background noise of your dorm room or your first apartment or your worst year, then it was your garden too. A place where things were simple and absurd and comforting, where friends showed up and stayed, where the world got crazy but always snapped back to normal, where someone was always ordering pizza. And here's one more thought, one more philosophical thread I want to pull, because I think it matters. There's a concept in Stoic philosophy called the view from above. Marcus Aurelius practiced it. You imagine yourself rising above your life, above your city, above your country, above the earth itself, until you can see the whole of human existence stretching out below you. Every life, every struggle, every triumph and every failure, all happening simultaneously, all equally small, all equally temporary. The view from above isn't meant to make you feel insignificant. It's meant to give you perspective, to help you realize that the things you're worrying about, the job you hate, the person who rejected you, the test you failed, the opportunity you missed, are real, yes, and they matter, yes, but they're also just part of the vast, churning, absurd, beautiful human experience. You're not alone in your confusion. You're not the only one who doesn't have it figured out. Everyone is pushing a boulder up a hill. Everyone is sitting in the garden, eating pizza, wondering what comes next. Regular Show gives us the view from above in its finale. We see the characters' lives compressed into a montage. 25 years of marriages and children and careers and changes and loss, all in a few minutes. And from that height, from that temporal distance, you can see the pattern, the mess and the beauty, and the slow, stumbling progress toward becoming who you're supposed to be. Mordecai becomes an artist. 25 years after he dropped out of art school, he moved to New York, opened a studio, put his experiences at the park on canvas, and found someone who loved him for who he actually was, not who he was pretending to be. He stopped being in bad faith. He stopped hiding. He became. Rigby becomes a father. 25 years after he dropped out of high school, the most irresponsible character on the show becomes responsible for other human lives. And I think the show is making a point here that the skills you learn in the garden, the skills of friendship and loyalty and showing up even when you don't want to, those are the skills of parenthood too. Rigby didn't waste his time at the park. He was training for the rest of his life. He just didn't know it. Benson becomes content. 25 years after he was fired from his band, he's still at the park, still managing. But the anger is gone. The resentment has dissolved. He chose to be there, and that choice, renewed every day for a quarter century, has transformed the prison into a home. Nietzsche's amor fati. The last man becomes the affirming man, not by achieving greatness, but by finding greatness in the ordinary. And High Five Ghost becomes a DJ. And I love this because it's such a minor detail, but it tells you everything. High Five Ghost, the quietest character, the one who exists almost entirely through his relationship with Muscle Man, whose entire identity is a single gesture of connection, finds a career that's all about connection. DJing is about reading a room, about understanding what people need to feel in a particular moment, about creating shared experience through sound. It's the high five, scaled up to a crowd. 25 years. That's a long time to figure yourself out. And the show doesn't judge them for taking that long. It doesn't suggest they should have gotten there faster. It doesn't imply that they should have been more efficient with their self-actualization, should have had a plan, should have been hustling and grinding their way towards some optimized version of themselves. The show says, take your time. It's okay. The garden is patient. Your friends are patient. You'll get there. Maybe not on a schedule, maybe not in a straight line, but you'll get there. And it says, that's enough. That's a life. That counts. I think about the people listening to this right now. Some of you are in college. Some of you are in your 20s, working jobs you're not sure about, not sure what comes next. Some of you are older, and you've already made the choices that define your life, and you're not sure if they were the right ones. And I can't tell you that everything will work out, because I'm not a philosopher, and this is a YouTube video about a cartoon. But I can tell you what Regular Show tells you, which is the same thing every philosopher we've talked about tonight, from Sartre to Camus to Kierkegaard to Heidegger, would tell you, you're free. You're absurdly, terrifyingly, beautifully free. And the only thing you have to do with that freedom is choose. Choose who to be, choose who to love, choose what to care about. And then keep choosing every day, even when it doesn't make sense. Even when the boulder rolls back down the hill, even when the cassette tape comes to life and starts attacking the park, because the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a person's heart. One must imagine Mordecai and Rigby happy, and I do. I really do. Thank you for being here tonight. I mean that. Thank you for spending this time with me, thinking about a show that meant a lot to me, and, I suspect, meant a lot to you too. Regular Show ran for 244 episodes across 8 seasons, from 2010 to 2017. And it was created by J.G. Quintel, with a cast that includes Quintel himself as Mordecai, William Salyers as Rigby, Sam Marin as Benson, Pops, and Muscle Man, and Mark Hamill as Skips. It won a Primetime Emmy for the episode Eggcellent, and it ended with a lollipop man flying into the sun to save the universe, which is, when you think about it, the most Regular Show thing imaginable. Something so ordinary, something so extraordinary. And you know, I want to say one final thing, because I've been talking for a long time now, and I've been through a lot of philosophers, and a lot of episodes, and a lot of feelings, and I want to end on something simple. Regular Show debuted on September 6th, 2010. A new sequel series, Regular Show The Lost Tapes, with Quintel returning as showrunner, is set to premiere in May of 2026. That's nearly 16 years between the first episode and the continuation. 16 years for the audience to grow up, to change, to become different people. 16 years for the garden to live in our memories, fermenting, gaining meaning, becoming the kind of artifact that Baudrillard would say exists in a space between the real and the simulated. I don't know what the lost tapes will be. I don't know if it can capture the same magic. But I know this, the fact that it exists, the fact that Quintel is coming back to this world, that these characters still have stories to tell, that matters. It matters because it means the garden isn't sealed. The gate is still open. There's still pizza on the table, and a video game console on the couch, and a couch to sit on, and a friend to sit next to. And maybe that's the most philosophical thing of all. Not the Sartre, or the Camus, or the Heidegger. Just the simple, stubborn, beautiful fact that stories continue. That people who love something come back to it. That the boulder doesn't just roll back down the hill. Sometimes, on a good day, it stays at the top long enough for you to enjoy the view. And if you can't sleep, well, that's what the next video is for. I'll be here. There's always another show to pull apart. Another world to look at sideways. Another philosophy hiding inside something you didn't expect. Hit subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment telling me which Regular Show moment hit you the hardest. And get some rest. Or don't. I'll be talking either way. Good show. Jolly good show. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.